The BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
Tonight we have a special Shakespearean edition of My Word, and so it's fitting that the programme is being recorded before a specially invited audience in the Royal Shakespeare Theatre at Stratford-upon-Avon. And those taking part are Nancy Spain, Dilys Powell, Denis Norden, and Frank Muir. We'll go straight into round one, which deals with the meanings of certain words used by Shakespeare, which are not in absolutely general use today. 2 marks if you get the meaning right. Beginning with Dilys Powell. Dilys, what's the meaning of Ticklebrain?
Tickle which?
Ticklebrain.
Brain?
Just like that.
Ticklebrain. Smart Alec.
No.
Smart Alec.
Have a shot at the play.
Man with an itchy hat.
What was the advice you gave me, Jack?
My advice would be to go to a bar where they kept strong liquor, but I can't give you any marks because Ticklebrain means strong liquor, and it's Falstaff to Mistress Quickly, peace, good Ticklebrain. Denis Norden, what is or was a Leet?
I don't really know. I can only presume that in Macbeth, when the porter hears the knocking on the door, he says, "Wait a minute while I go get a Leet."
Dennis, I'm quite sure he did, but it isn't in the first folio. It's no good. It's in the Taming of the Shrew, in the induction, and it means a court of the manor, a court Leet. And Sly, who was supposed to be in a trance, says he would present her at the Leet for some sort of damages, I suppose. Nancy Spain, what is or was a lifter? A lifter.
A lifter?
It's a kind of medieval brazier.
Wait.
According to the Bacon Society, Shakespeare was a lifter.
But would it be anything to do with, robbery or something?
Yes, that's getting better.
Well, somebody who lifts something
Yes.
is a thief.
All right, that'll do. 2 marks. It's Cressida to Pandarus in Troilus and Cressida, and Pandarus has been praising Troilus and saying he was a better chap than Hector. Back to Frank Muir. What is Wannion? Wannion. Wannion.
Oh yes, this occurs in several of Shakespeare's plays. It means a prize-winning onion.
I can't remember any play in which that was a subject.
No, it's not a subject, not written about it, but it's very relevant. It also means a solitary bunion. Wannion. The meaning has been corrupted, no doubt to the phrase you have on your answer. What have you got?
But if you ask me that, you're settling for no marks. I'm sorry. It means vengeance. And it's in Pericles, the first fisherman, saying, "Look how thou stirrest now, come away, or I'll fetch thee with a wannion," with a vengeance. Well, before we start round 2, I give each team a quotation for them to write down, and I want the 2 women members of the team to study their quotations, and then at the end I shall ask where those quotations come from. So, Dilys Powell with Frank Muir, your quotation is, "The quality of mercy is not strained," and Nancy Spain and Denis Norden, yours is, "4 lagging winters and 4 wanton springs." And then at the end of the programme I shall ask Frank and Denis to give me their ideas of how these words came to be written. And I don't want any of those answers yet. So to round 2, which is the who or what department, 2 marks, they get them right. Dilys Powell, who were the Thane of Cawdor and the Thane of Fife?
Well, there were two characters in Macbeth.
I want a better identification than that.
Really?
There are lots of Thanes.
Thane of Fife had a wife. Where is she now?
Yes, but who was he?
Oh, dear. Frank.
No, it wasn't me.
Eventually became
Thane of
Thane
Fife.
of, Thane of Cawdor was Macbeth in time.
All right, yes, that'll do for half of it. Thane of Fife, have a shot at that.
Macduff.
Oh, you've got it at last. Well done. All right, back to Denis Norden. Two plays of Shakespeare were set mainly in Verona. Which were they?
Well, I'll have sixpence on Two Gentlemen of Verona.
Good enough. That's half the answer. And the other
Romeo
one?
and Juliet.
Yes. Two Gentlemen of Verona and Romeo and Juliet. 2 marks. All right, back to Nancy Spain. Nancy, what was the name of Shylock's daughter?
Jessica.
All right, fair enough.
Good old names.
It's a good old name.
Stole off with that Lear about Lorenzo. 2 marks.
British name.
Frank Muir, the names of King Lear's 3 daughters.
Goneril, Regan,
Yes.
and D'Artagnan. Cordelia.
Fair enough. Goneril, Regan, and Cordelia. Well, the next round's about songs, because there were plenty of them, songs and chants and roundelays in Shakespeare's plays. For a maximum of 4 marks possible, can you give me the next lines to the ones I quote, together with the name of the play, and if you possibly can, the name of the singer too? Starting with Dilys Powell. You spotted snakes with double tongue, thorny hedgehogs be not seen.
You think I know that?
Yes.
You do?
I know a bit of it.
Come on, Frank.
Because I did this for Junior Oxford.
I thought you did to get into
Newts and
Sandhurst.
blind worms be no woe, come not near our fairy queen.
That's it.
And it was I was in sacking, I was bottom. And, it was, one of the attendants to Queen Titania.
Absolutely right.
And she was lying back on a rather bumpy lump of cardboard. And the fairies sang that to get her to sleep.
What an instructive program this is.
Isn't it good? Yes. And Dilys, surprisingly, you get 4 marks.
Thank you, dear.
You spotted snakes with double tongue, thorny hedgehogs be not seen, newts and blind worms do no wrong, come not near our fairy queen. Midsummer Night's Dream, as Frank said, one of the fairies lulling Titania to sleep before the arrival of Bottom. Now, Denis Norden, I am gone, sir, and anon, sir, I'll be with you again.
Is that 12th night?
Yes.
Festa?
Festi, yeah.
Yes.
Now, wait a minute. That's the bit where it's got ha-ha the devil in it, isn't it?
Yes,
that
quite
song
right.
somewhere.
Yes, absolutely right.
Well, it's the one that's got ha-ha the devil.
I see you are.
I'm not venturing off safe ground for 1 minute.
Do you remember who he's singing it to, Dennis?
To Malvolio.
That's it.
Wasn't it?
I'm gone, sir, and anon, sir, I'll be with you again, in a trice like to the old vice, your need to sustain, sung by the clown in Twelfth Night to Malvolio, who's been put in jug because they think he's mad. 3.5 out of 4. Nancy Spain. The master, the swabber, the boatswain and I, the gunner and his mate.
Oh, yes. The Tempest.
Yes.
The drunken beast reels on and he sings.
Yes,
there was
that's all right.
Mary and Mary May and Magdalene and Moll.
I thought it was Don't Bring Lulu.
None of us cared for Kate.
Well, before you bring in any more girlfriends, I'm going to mark you 4.
It's number 1 on the hit parade in its day.
The master, the swabber, the boatswain and I, the gunner and his mate, loved Maul, Megan, Marion and Marjorie, but none of us cared for Kate. Quite right, Nancy, that's all right. Sung by Stefano in The Tempest, and he called it, because he was drunk, a scurvy tune to sing at a man's funeral.
Shocking thing, drunkenness.
Now, Frank Muir, yours is perhaps more of a chant or even a dirge than a song, just to help you.
Suitably.
Starts like this. By the pricking of my thumbs.
Someone evil outside comes. Or this way comes. This is. It's open locks. Whoever knocks, enter Duncan in his socks. It's the if you'll excuse the blasted heath. It's Macbeth, and it's which witch I know not, but it's one of the three witches.
That's all right. 4 marks. I hope it wasn't Duncan, because he's been dead for 3 acts. By the pricking of my thumbs, something wicked this way comes. Open locks, whoever knocks, and then as Frank quite right, he says, enter Macbeth, who then says, how now, you secret black and midnight hags. Act 4, Macbeth. Second witch. Well, in the next round, these are things which people have said about Shakespeare, and many people have said many things about Shakespeare and his works. For 2 marks, I want to know who are responsible for saying or writing these remarks. Beginning with Dilys Powell, if we wish to know the force of human genius, we should read Shakespeare. If we wish to see the insignificance of human learning, we may study his commentators. Unkind to critics.
Not very long ago. No.
Well, about 120
Yes. Well, it's not
years, thereabouts.
a trifle, yes. Hazlitt.
Absolutely right. 2 marks. Well done, Dilys. Hazlitt's Table Talk, or The Ignorance of the Learned. Now, Denis Norden, a bit further back. The stream of time, which is continually washing the dissoluble fabrics of other poets, passes without injury by the adamant of Shakespeare.
If you really want to see the insignificance of human learning, everybody had a good word to say for him. It could have been anybody. No.
I tried to put on my fine 18th century voice, Dennis.
Johnson.
Johnson.
I think 1.5. I helped a bit too much there. It's Samuel Johnson's preface to the works of Shakespeare, 1765. In Nancy Spain, they were built out of music.
Oh, I know this. It's Oscar Wilde.
Yes.
Jolly good.
Do you remember the book?
It must
essay?
be the critic as a liar, or the liar as a critic, or the critic as an artist, or
That's it. Oscar Wilde, the critic as artist. Well done, Nancy. 2 marks. Come on a bit into the next century, Frank.
Thank you.
Who was it who inferred that if in fact Shakespeare's plays were found not to have been written by Shakespeare, he, for one, wouldn't wish to act in them anymore?
L. Oliveri. Lawrence should write more clearly. Sir Laurence Olivier said
Yes.
that, Jack.
So it was. Absolutely right. Sir Laurence Olivier. Well, now we come to the last round and go back to those quotations I gave the 2 teams earlier on in the programme. For 2 marks, Dilys Powell, I'd like the origin of your quotation. The quality of mercy is not strained.
Merchant of Venice.
Yes?
Portia.
Yes.
Making her trial speech.
Absolutely right, yes. Portia, Act 4 of The Merchant of Venice. Quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. Now, Nancy Spain, the origin of your quotation, which was 4 lagging winters and 4 wanton springs.
I haven't the faintest idea.
That's splendid. I think it's a much harder quotation than Dilys' All right.
Is it in the sonnets or something like that?
No marks. It's a historical play. It's in Richard II. It's Bolingbroke. How long a time lies in one little word, 4 lagging winters and 4 wanton springs, end in a word, such is the breath of kings. The King Richard II, showing power, as it were, has taken 4 years off his sentence of banishment. That's the word of the king. Sorry, I can't give you marks. And now I shall ask Frank and Denis to let me have their explanation of how these quotations came into being, and on this occasion the marks will go to whichever unlikely explanation receives the larger and longer amount of applause from the audience here in the theatre. So back to Frank Muir. The quality of mercy is not strained.
No, it's very true. It's absolutely true, that. Because quite recently, devotees, either or both of the devotees of this program, may have remember that I did a story about my koala bear called Eros. And I made a plaintive appeal for eucalyptus gum leaves to Australia, and I asked for a gum tree fit for Eros to leaf in, you see. And there was sort of 10 seconds paralysed silence, and the whole thing was very embarrassing. But the people are terribly kind, you know, and a couple of days ago I had a letter from Australia saying I was very touched by your story of Eros and his lack of proper food. So I'm sending him the sort of thing you asked for. And it was signed, yours sincerely, Oscar O'Flaherty Wills Murphy, who lived in Griffith, New South Wales. And sure enough, I got a notification from the East India Docks in the East End of London saying that a parcel had arrived for me. Mr. Murphy hadn't sent me gum leaves at all. He'd sent me a eucalyptus tree. I signed for it. Admittedly, it was a small one. It was only a sapling. It was only about as thick as my little finger. But it was 42 feet long. It was very nicely packed. The roots had been pruned and had been enclosed in a little tight ball of what the Americans rather nicely call burlap, which we call Hessian. I signed for the thing, and this awfully nice storeman said good morning, and I wondered how to get it home, you see, because I live the other side of London. It's about 32 miles away. Then I had an inspiration. There was a pawn shop there, and they had some roller skates in the window. I went in and I bought 10 pairs of roller skates, and I lashed them to my sapling every 4 feet. Then I took a firm grasp of the Hessian bomb and pulled it along. But that worked quite well. The whole thing was rather like a very thin snake on roller skates, but it worked, except that I realised it would take me about 2 days to get home. And I realised unless I healed the tree in, or planted it and watered it, the thing would die, and my poor koala bear would probably die too, and Mr. Murphy's gift would be wasted. Just then, a Roman Catholic priest came along on a motorised bicycle. So I stopped him, and I arranged with him a plan whereby I took the belt off my trousers, made a slip knot through the buckle, fastened that round the Hessian bomb end, then laced that to the saddlebag of the motorised bicycle. Then I discarded 9 pairs of skates, put the other pair of skates on, and I held up the wispy end, you see, and he pulled me along. Rather like a kind of ground water skiing, I suppose the effect was. And the priest took to it very well. He had a rather large crash helmet, and he bent low over the handlebars and revved up, and we sped up along the commercial road, really going at a good lick. We passed Rotherhithe, and we passed Limehouse. You know those cobbles start just by the commercial road? When you're doing 30 miles an hour, hanging on to the end of a 42-foot sapling, and you strike cobbles, and you're on roller skates, and you've taken the belt off your trousers. The trouble was I couldn't bend down to pull them up, you see, because I tried, and I wobbled terribly dangerously. And we went right across London, right home. It was a bit nasty, weaving. There was a very nasty right-angle bend, just, if you can follow me, just before you get to Sunbury, there's a factory, Job's. I think they make comforters. You turn sharp right, and that rather bent my sapling a bit. But we got home, and I planted it, and I showed it to my koala, who whimpered with pleasure, gladdened my heart. But in the morning it was drooped. And I realised what had happened. Going round the corner, either by Job's or going round Piccadilly, I'd sprained its bowl. And you know it's like when you sprain a tree's bole, it'll droop and die. And I was terribly worried. I didn't know what to do after Mr. Murphy. So, excuse me. Got terribly het up. So what I did was I ran round to my dentist and got a light van, and I borrowed his portable X-ray machine, and I cello-taped 240 tooth X-ray plates all up the sapling, and I X-rayed the whole thing, and I sent them all off to the Royal College of Tree Surgery at Wood Lane, Shepherd's Bush, and I told them the whole story. It took 9 foolscap sheets. And I said, please, is it going to be all right? And this morning, I thought you'd be glad to know, I got the reply. It was just a simple medical bulletin. But to me, it was a line of poetry, almost a line of Shakespeare's. It just said simply, the koala tree of Murphy is not sprained.
Personally, I'll never drive through London again after that. And now, back to Denis Norden, and you'll remember his quotation was, 4 lagging winters and 4 wanton springs.
I'm sorry to have to bring you bad news after that heartwarming story, but it appears that for several generations, the most eminent Shakespearean scholars have been wrong about an episode in Shakespeare's life, and that was to the effect that Shakespeare at one time had been on the verge of being arrested for poaching. Now, this was not the crime with which he was charged. It was simply due to the illegibility of Elizabethan handwriting, and anybody who has visited Stratford will know what that crime is with which he was charged. He was charged with parking. With leaving his horse in the roadway in such a manner as to cause an obstruction. And it was for this reason that he left Anne Hathaway his second best bed. You don't appear to see the connection. Well, I'll have to go into it in more detail. See, the morning after it happened, Shakespeare went to London and arrived at the Mermaid Tavern in High Dudgeon. And he approached his best friend, Ben Jonson, who were always together, those two. They were known as Bill and Ben, actually. And he said, on leaving Mistress Hathaway's cottage this morning, where I did repair myself in order to bid her farewell, I was apprehended and warned of a summons by 2 local constabulary who were lurking nearby in a Z carriage. That is what had happened. The 2 policemen had found him and warned him that if he left his horse there again, he would be summoned. Now, a parking summons in those days was much more serious than now, because for parking, you got put in the stocks, flogged, and then deported. Johnson said, well, what does this mean? He says, it means that whenever I come to London, I cannot leave my horse outside Mistress Hathaway's cottage again. So he said, well, don't bother to. Can't you leave the horse somewhere else? He said, well, leave the horse unattended in Stratford. I should hot chocolate. Because, you see, cocoa didn't come to the country another 100-odd years yet, you see. So Johnson said, well, I'll tell you the only thing you can do if you want to avoid being deported, put in the stocks, and flogged for parking, when you go into Mistress Hathaway's cottage, you must take the horse in with you. What about the bedroom? Shakespeare said, watch it. He said, why don't you put the horse in the bedroom? And Shakespeare said, but what about the smell? Whereupon Johnson said, for the very first time in recorded history, the horse won't mind. That is what Shakespeare eventually did, and every time he came down to the Mermaid Tavern in London, he left his horse in the bedroom, which is the reason for the whole thing, because obviously you put a horse in a small bedroom, the windows got broken, it got drafty, so the horse sat on the bed springs broke. And that was the reason that Shakespeare left Anne Hathaway his second best bed with all the furnishings or bedclothes, as in the quotation you have just heard. For lagging windows and for wanting springs.
Well, for that wildly plausible Shakespearean story, I think by your vote, Denis Norden just wins. I award the mark to him, and that brings us to a final score in which Nancy Spain and Denis Norden win by 4.5 marks from Dilys Powell and Frank Muir, and it also brings to an end this special edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Nancy Spain, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC. The BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and this programme comes from the Beveridge Hall at London University. And those taking part are Nancy Spain, Dilys Powell, Denis Norden and Frank Muir. Here's round 1 to test their vocabulary. 2 marks if they get the meaning of the following words reasonably right. Beginning with Dilys Powell. Dilys, what is a polyhistor? P-O-L-Y-H-I-S-T-O-R, polyhistor.
Means the hell of a lot of historians.
It doesn't. It's one small head you've got to concentrate on.
One very learned scholar.
Yeah. It's a man of very varied learning, a great scholar, polyhistor. Now, Denis Norden, what's the meaning of fusiform?
We may be people who do business with words, but we've never done business with this one.
It would help you, Denis, if you were smoking a cigar rather than a cigarette.
It would help me if I was smoking a cigar. It would help me in every way if I could afford to. If form is in the shape of fusiform, not flusiform.
No.
Yes, it's in the shape of fuse. A fuse is oblong porcelain, a piece of oblong porcelain with a wire running through the center. So therefore, fusiform is anything which is in the shape of a bit of oblong porcelain with a wire.
Or even a cigar
Yes,
shape.
and As there are not many of these, the word is practically obsolete.
All right. Half a mark for knowing it was in the shape of, and I did help you. It means tapering at both ends, like a cigar or a spindle, or rather like most cigars. The most expensive kinds of cigars have a sort of cut-off at the end, I know, but shaped like a cigar. And now Nancy Spain. Nancy, what is a hornbook?
Well, it's a thing shaped like that, Jack.
That's no help.
Well, all right, you hold it at the bottom by its handle.
Yes?
And on top there is a sort of ghastly kind of thing like a mirror, made of horn, I suppose.
Yeah.
And on this are printed A, B, C, and cat on dog, and dog is up on ox, and things like that. And goodness knows why, but the children used to learn to read from these meaningless phrases in little old schools.
Before you criticize medieval education any further, I'm going to give you your 2 marks. It is, in fact, a kind of child's primer. Either the
Fusiform,
alphabet,
yeah.
yes, or the Lord's Prayer, or things of that sort, mounted on a wooden tablet, covered with horn, so it didn't all rub off. They hadn't got any sort of plastic at that stage, that's why they had to do it that way, and that's it. And now Frank Muir. Frank, what is a bear leader?
It's a kind of German song sung by nudists.
Frank, all I can say is that might be included in the program, but it isn't exactly what I want.
Is it the husky young leader of the pack?
No, I think one would be quite enough.
No, sort of take them round in parties and show them how to behave.
A courier?
Kind of cool, you
You think so? Oh, I think so. Excuse us a moment, Jack, would you?
Yes, of course. Yes.
Kind of cool.
We think it's a kind of chap who takes the others round.
Yes, that's all right.
Is it? Well, mark me then. You can't go on.
I think 1.5 marks would be a pretty generous mark. It's a travelling tutor, a chap who takes one of these unlicked cubs around the continent, bear being in the sense of a loutish, ill-mannered young man until you've been tutor to him. Just like that. Well, before we start the second round, I give each team a quotation for them to write down, and I want the 2 women members of the team to study their quotations, and at the end I shall ask them where the quotations come from. So, Dilys Powell and Frank Muir, here's your quotation. We've been together now for 40 years. And Nancy Spain and Denis. Your quotation is, shoot, father, I am not afraid. And then at the end of the program, I shall ask Frank and Denis to give me their ideas of how these words came to be said or written. And I don't want any of these answers yet. Well, the next round is Shakespeare. And Shakespeare used lots of words which are not all in general use today. People quote them, and presumably when they quote them, they know what they mean. So that's a charitable assumption. 2 marks, if you get it right. Dilys Powell, what is a mumble news? M-U-M-B-L-E-N-E-W-S, a mumble news.
Well, it must be somebody who comes along with a bit of news and mumbles it.
Very good.
Yes?
Very
girl.
logical, I consider. Doesn't really tell you until you're absolutely mad what he has to tell you.
It tells much too much.
Tells too much.
Yes,
A gossip.
Oh, out with it, yes.
Gossip.
Yes, a gossip, yes.
That's it.
A chatterbox.
It's a tale-bearer, sneak, gossip, chatterbox, and so on. And a good example of it is in Love's Labour's Lost, where Verona says, some carry-tale, some please-man, some slight zany, some mumble news, some trencher knight, some dick that smiles his cheek in years and knows the trick to make my lady laugh. Just like that. Denis Norden, ear bussing or ear kissing?
Well, you get a lot of it when you have somebody reading over your shoulder in an underground.
That's getting very close, Denis.
Well, it's ear kissing. It wasn't peculiar to Shakespeare's time, surely.
Read
Any
any
visit to the
newspaper?
cinema? You're a film critic. You must have seen a lot of ear-bussing. Critic
Every
Dilys.
morning at 10:30?
It is, yes. 10:30 in the morning.
Yes, sir.
Oh, dear. That would only be with continental films. Yes. Is it some kind of affectionate...
No, on the least, not at all affectionate, rather malicious.
Probably stealing your earring.
People coming up and say, what's this ear?
I don't think you're somehow going to get this one, Dennis. I think I can mark
That's a
it for
pretty
it.
shrewd assumption.
It means whispered. And in Lear, Curran says to the nasty fellow, Edmund, "Nay, I know not. You've heard of the news abroad. I mean the whispered ones, for they are yet but ear-kissing arguments." It means putting your lips quite close up against somebody's ear, not because you're affectionate, but because you want to whisper something unpleasant. Nancy Spain. Shakespeare again. Rookie. R-O-O-K-Y. Rookie.
To the rookie wood.
Yes, now what's it mean?
I dare not go on, because it's unfair to quote Macbeth, the place will fall around us. But I imagine that it means swarming with rooks,
Yes.
and perfectly beastly, absolutely disgusting, dark wood with terrible...
Yes. Now, yes, all right, you get your 3 marks. It's absolutely splendid, that was, Nancy. It's Macbeth, Act 3. Macbeth says, "Light thickens and the crow makes wing to the rooky wood. Good things of day begin to droop and drowse, whiles night's black agents to their praise do rouse." He just about to have Banquo bumped off. And that great authority, Professor Empson, sides partly on your side, Nancy, saying it can mean a wood that's already full of crows or rooks. It could mean murky or dusky, it could mean misty or gloomy, or it could simply mean a rooking or perching wood, and you take a choice.
Depends which rook you breed.
You bred any good rooks lately?
I give up. Frank Muir, this is very appropriate. Knit.
Spitting out every word through clenched teeth. A small, parasitic thing.
Good enough. And
Shakespeare.
Shakespeare, and used as not as a term of love or anything of that sort.
Comes from Midsummer Night's Dream.
All right, 3 marks lest worst before. It comes in Love's Labour's Lost. It also comes in The Taming of the Shrew, where Petruchio is berating the tailor. "Thou liest, thou thread, thou thimble, thou yard, 3/4, half yard, quarter nail, thou flea, thou knit, thou winter cricket, thou." Now then, the next round, I think it's possibly true that the virtues and the merits of education and learning have been extolled through most ages, and today we tend to rate them fairly highly, but there were people every now and then who had other things to say about education and about institutes of learning. 2 marks if you can tell me who wrote the following by their styles of writing. Here's yours, Dilys Powell. "Soap and education are not as sudden as a massacre, but they are more deadly in the long run."
Soap and education,
Yes.
did you say? Soap and
Are not as sudden as a massacre, but they're more deadly in the long run. He also said at one stage words to the effect that the reports of my recent death have been greatly exaggerated.
Mark Twain.
Helped you quite a lot there, didn't
Thank you, yes.
All right, I think 1.5, Dilys. It's Mark Twain and the facts concerning the recent resignation in Sketches New and Old, 1900. Denis Norden. "There is nothing on earth intended for innocent people so horrible as school. To begin with, it is a prison, but in some respects more cruel than a prison. In a prison, for instance, you're not forced to read books written by the warders and the governor. In prison, they may torture your body, but they do not torture your brain."
Is it somebody who often made this comparison with a prison? Somebody who said that home was a prison?
Yes.
Is it?
Yes.
Sure.
Yes, quite right. Bernard Shaw, Parents and Children. Well done, Dennis, 2 marks. Nancy Spain, thou hast most traitorously corrupted the youth of the realm in erecting a grammar school.
A grammar school? And thou hast? I thought it was going to be Sophocles, you know.
I'll
Socrates.
go on a bit longer if that'll help you. And
Yes,
whereas
dear.
before our forefathers had no other books but the score and the tally, thou hast caused printing to be used, and contrary to the king, his crown and dignity, thou hast built a paper mill.
A paper mill? Oh, it could be Shakespeare.
It is
It could
Shakespeare.
be that mad play where they all whiz about in fours, pretending, you know, and sending up schoolmasters the whole time. What's
No,
it
that's
called?
a good guess,
Love's
but doesn't
Labour's
it?
Measure for Measure, or one of them, you know.
No, Love's Labour Lost, you're thinking of.
Yes.
All right, I give you half a mark for Shakespeare. It's Shakespeare's Henry VI, Part 2. It's said by the rebel, Jack Cade, to Lord Say, whom they've just captured. And they say, away with him, he speaks Latin. A good sort of scientific maxim. And then they shoot him or hang him or something. Frank Muir, everybody who is incapable of learning has taken to teaching.
Is this the man that did the those who can do, those who can't teach?
Yeah.
Sure.
No, I'm sorry. You're probably right and I'm probably wrong, but it's nearly a contemporary of yours, and an Irishman.
Oscar Flaherty Wills Wilde.
Yes. I think
Himself.
1.5, because I did help there. Oscar Wilde, The Decay of Lying. And now we come to the last round, and we go back to the two quotations I gave the teams earlier on in the programme. For 2 marks, Dilys Powell, can you give me the origin of your quotation? And if you remember, it was, we've been together now for 40 years.
It's a song sung by Albert Chevalier.
And written by?
Albert is me
It's called
darling.
Me Old Dutch, but I
Yes.
who wrote it? Himself, I should think.
Yes, that's right. It's Albert Chevalier wrote the words and the music and sang it, and it's My Old Dutch. Well done, 2 marks. And now, Nancy Spain, the origin of yours, which was, shoot, father, I am not afraid.
William Tell.
Well, son of William Tell.
Well, yes. William Tell Jr.
Yes, sequel. 20 years after or something, yes. Well done. I don't know where it's written down, and it is a legend, and it's supposed to be authentic, and the Swiss constitution is all founded on it and all that. And now I want Denis Norden and Frank Muir to give me their ideas of how these words came to be said or written, and on this occasion the marks will go to whichever unlikely explanation draws the longer and larger amount of applause from the audience in the hall. And beginning with Frank Muir, we've been together now for 40 years.
This morning, at breakfast, I'd finished my morning paper. I don't like cornflakes, they're too... and I went to the library while my wife cleared the table. And I went back and helped my wife wash up. My wife said, why do you spend all your time reading that book? See, so I clattered the plates a bit, just to show I was a bit peeved, and said, I don't know why you take that tone. This book has been a turning point in my life. It's the Merry Andrew Encyclopedia of Universal Knowledge. I don't know why people need to go to universities when this book is there. And I've been reading it. I said to my wife, I'm full of information, you know. I said to my wife, do you realize that crabs are stone deaf? I said to my wife, do you realize that in the 18th century, if you had defective hearing, there was a cure. One got a tuft of tow. It hadn't to be flaxen tow. It had to be woolen tow, which you got by gathering it from the hedges that the sheep had rubbed up against. And you dipped this little piece of tow into a warm mixture of honey and oil of squills. My wife said, now what on earth do you want all that information for? I said, but one day, on my word, Jack Longland's going to say, now a quick round. Frank Muir, how did they cure bad hearing in the 18th century? I'll say, bit of tow, dip it in the honey, and you see, I shall appear so erudite. No one will be ruder than I shall be with this backlog of information, because it hasn't happened yet until this afternoon, you see. Because I wanted to come up early so as not to be late for the do this evening, and I arrived a bit early, so then it happened, because I thought I'd go and look at that new skyscraper hotel in Park Lane. So I went. It's terribly tall, isn't it? If you put your head right up, you can only just see the top story. Well, I couldn't quite see the top story, so I backed a bit, you see. There's an extraordinary scientific thing that a head can go between park railings quite comfortably. It's something to do with the sort of barbed shape of the ears or something, but I was fast lodged. I only had a spare hour. Well, the fire brigade were terribly good, and they came along and they sawed away, and the police held the traffic back, and they got me clear. But now things were a bit desperate, because I was due here at 6:15. It was then about 6:05, and Denis was going to wait for me outside. So I jumped on a bus, and I paid, and I got off, you know. Because I was just about to get off, and I'm very neat about tickets, you know. It's a funny thing, you know, that a wrist which will go through a used ticket slot, quite simply. Whether it's the wristwatch caught underneath, I don't know. So I pulled like mad and rather badly scraped the back of my hand, and I dashed into a chemist shop and got one of those blue rolls of cotton wool, and so I ran the last mile and a quarter to pick up Denis. And if you undo a long blue roll, it goes all over the place. There's miles of the stuff. I only wanted a little bit to dab it. I stuffed it in my pockets, and it went all over my suit, and I dabbed it on my hand, and I arrived, and there was Jack Longland at the gate. He said, "May I have an explanation of this behaviour?" He said, "What are you covered in cotton wool for?" And then inspiration struck. I said to Jack, "This isn't cotton wool, this is tow. Denis and I have been on an errand of mercy. We have been collecting material to assuage the pains of those among us with dodgy harkers." Jack said, "Do what?" And I drew myself up to my full height, 6'6" in my shocking feet, and I said to him, "We've been to gather tow for faulty ears."
I've always wanted to know what the word apocryphal means, and I know now. So back to Denis Norden, and if you remember, his quotation was, "Shoot, father, I am not afraid."
I am completely disenchanted with the whole William Tell legend. As you know, this whole dreary incident took place at a time when the whole of Switzerland was occupied by the Austrians. And the Austrians, as is the custom with governing bodies, made it their first duty to impose a tax. It was an archery tax. Because, you see, in Switzerland, archery was the prevailing sport, very much as golf is over here. And you can't play golf in Switzerland, you see, because of the Alps. The ball rolls downhill, and you cannot perfect a swing when you are roped to your caddy. So, archery had taken its place, and because of its popularity, it was obviously something to put a tax upon. William Tell refused to pay the archery tax. Now, in those days, if you didn't pay your tax, there was a very definite procedure. The tax authorities shot you, which is somewhat different from today, when you are just allowed to die a slow, lingering death. So, having proclaimed he would not pay this tax, they sent a minor tax official round to shoot him. However, William Tell's son protested. Now, he had two sons. One was called Fred, the other one was called Bert. And the son said to the minor tax official, "You cannot shoot my father, because with him, archery is not a sport, it is his way of life. You see, he bets in pubs that he can shoot things with a bow and arrow for drinks. And as he is a habitual drunk, I claim it is his way of life, and he can claim tax exemption." Well, this official was only a minor official, and he hesitated, and he said, well, of course, if he's that good at it. Young Fred, who was a tough little fellow, very aggressive, with jug ears, he said, good at it. He said, if you come tomorrow, my father will shoot an apple off my head. The tax official said, well, if he's that good, all right, I'll come back. Immediately he left. William seized young Fred. Dummkopf, he said, pronouncing both the P and the F, which is difficult. He said, I am not that good. The boy said, I didn't say what kind of an apple. What about a pineapple? Next day, the tax official came back, and he'd brought a tax commissioner with him. And there was little Fred with a pineapple upon his head. And the tax commissioner said, I'm very sorry, but that will not do. Either you place this small Cox's orange pippin upon your head and allow your father to shoot it, or else we will shoot your father. They put it upon young Fred's head. But unfortunately, Fred had been born in the German part of Switzerland and had the characteristic Teutonic skull, which is fusiform. Now, you will all have jotted down in your notebooks the meaning of fusiform, and you will know it means it comes slightly to a point, and no apple will stay on it. So brave and tough as he was, little Fred could not put the apple upon his head for his father. The tax commissioner said, in that case we shall have to shoot you. William said, wait, I have another son. And he called Bert. Now, Bert came out, he was younger, and a very different kind of boy from Fred. No tough he, sensitive, timid. Tax commissioner said, as your brother cannot perform this, we must ask you. Either you place this small Cox's orange pippin upon your head and allow your father to shoot it, or else we will shoot your father. To which the boy made the reply, which has been so often misquoted. Shoot father, I am not tough Fred.
I think by your vote, William Tell and Rossini and Denis Norden get home. And that brings us to a most interesting result in which Dilys Powell and Frank Muir have scored exactly the same marks as Nancy Spain and Denis Norden. And it also brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Nancy Spain, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland. The program was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC.
The BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and those taking part are Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir, and Denis Norden. Here's round one. Try and test their vocabulary. 2 marks if they get the meanings right. Dilys Powell, what is a mangrove or mangrove?
It's got a tree with a lot of very sort of tangled roots.
Yes, and where would you expect to find it? Generally.
Oh, Indian Ocean.
Yes, that'll do.
Australia. We were one, weren't we?
Tropical tree or shrub. They use the bark for medicine or in tanning. It grows in the mud on the seashore and has most extraordinarily twisted roots. 2 marks. Denis Norden, what is a stylite? S-T-Y-L-I-T-E, a stylite.
It's for pigs who like to read in bed. Is this Saint Simeon?
Yes, that's the chap.
Well, he was, with all due respect, up the pole.
Yes.
He squatted on top of a pole or column.
Column, that's it. He was a medieval ascetic who lived on top of a pillar, and there were plenty of pillars about because lots of the temples had been knocked down, and St. Simeon Stylites was one of them, and Peter Amitra was another, a very sort of rigorous kind of life. Anne Scott James, what is or was a roc? R-O-C.
No K.
No K.
Oh, it's that enormous and terrifying bird that you meet in the Arabian Nights.
Yes.
It used to descend on people and swoop off with them.
Yes.
Carry them to its
Absolutely.
mountain, eyrie,
Sinbad.
nest.
Yes, absolutely right. Yes. Gigantic bird in Eastern legends and tales. Sinbad, I think, suffered from it on one occasion.
Oh, yes.
2 marks. Frank Muir, what are Persiennes? P-E-R-S-I-E-N-N-E-S. Persiennes, or Persian, if you like.
Well, some of the words we get on this programme are known, and some are unknown. I think these are Persiennes unknown.
I think Dilys
Shutters.
What?
Dilys says shutters.
Yes. Any particular kind of shutter?
Well, French ones.
Well, not quite.
French ones are called jalousie.
Yes.
There's a song
That'll
about
help a lot.
Jalousie, 'twas all over. Jalousie. Jalousie are Venetian blinds with which come down and do that.
And would you wear them inside or outside your window?
Outside, sir.
All right. I'll give you 2 marks.
50-50.
This is the difference between Persiennes, which came from Persia originally, which are horizontal laths fastened into a frame, so you could tilt them, as you do tilt a Venetian blind, to let in the sunlight or to keep it out. But they're worn outside the windows, whereas the Venetian blinds, which are on tapes or cords, are usually inside. Well done. Well, before we begin round 2, I give each team a quotation for them to write down. I want the 2 women members of the team to go on thinking about those quotations, and then at the end of the programme, I shall ask them where they come from. Not the women, but the quotations. Well, Dilys Powell and Frank Muir, here's your quotation. She's my sweetheart, I'm her beau. And Anne Scott James and Denis Norden, here's yours. Actions speak louder than words. And then at the end of the programme, I shall ask Frank and Denis to give me their idea of how these words came to be said or written. Well, round 2 is all about classical mythology. 2 marks if you get the answers reasonably right. Beginning with Dilys Powell. Perseus was a great mythological hero. Who was his father, whose influence helped him rather a lot in his career?
Zeus, they're all.
Yes.
Zeus was everybody's father.
That's all right. Zeus, or Jupiter, was the father of Perseus, and Zeus was very clever and came down in a shower of gold, which upset everybody very much, and the result was Perseus. Denis Norden. When this chap, Perseus, whom we've just heard about, went off to find the Gorgons and cut off the head of one of them, Medusa, he was lent a very special helmet to wear on this rather difficult enterprise. Where did he get that helmet from, and why was it so special as a helmet?
He was lent the helmet by a very famous Greek called Harry the Helmet Lender.
Well,
I really don't know, Jack.
The helmet helped him in a particular way, which you
Yes,
might say.
they all did. They all had these unfair advantages.
Yes,
They either
right.
turned into a shower of gold or swans.
Made him invisible.
Made
That's
him
it.
invisible. Thank you, Ryan. Yes.
1 out of 2. The helmet, in fact, came from Pluto, and he made Perseus invisible so that he wasn't turned to stone. Well, he got on to Anne Scott James. In ancient mythology, when people died, it was thought that their souls were ferried across a river by a certain boatman to the infernal regions. I'd like to know the name of the river and the name of the boatman.
The river was the Styx and the boatman was Charon.
Charon was the ferryman. There is, in fact, a slight confusion, as there often is in mythology, as to whether it was the Styx or
Or
the
the Acheron, yes.
Yes, well done. I'd like to give you a bonus mark for that, Anne, but I'm not allowed to do that.
Yes, it's all right, Jack. We won't tell.
All right, we will.
Your
We'll
secret
break
is
all our
safe
rules.
with
We'll
us.
give Anne 2.5 for knowing Acheron as well as Styx.
Can I have one for deportment?
One for deportment.
Hence horse races over the Styx.
Yes, very much so. And then Frank Muir again. Who was the god of shepherds, huntsmen, and countrymen, and later was thought to be the god of the whole universe, and why has his name been immortalized in a word in our language which is used to describe a certain acute type of fear?
Do what? Oh. A word has appeared, as if by magic, on the writing pad next to mine. It says pan.
Yes? And the fear?
Panic.
Yes, thank you very much. That's the word I wanted. 2 marks. Well, the next round is origins and derivations, to be marked up to a possible maximum of 3 marks. We begin with Dilys Powell. The place was a shambles. I want its present meaning and its derivation.
The place was a shambles. Well, it means it was a terrible mess and
Yes.
everything was upside down.
Yes, that's fair. And originally?
Well, a shambles is something to do with a sort of market, butcher's market, isn't it?
Yes, a rather particular part of the butcher's market.
Thumbles.
Where you cut it up.
3 marks it is. Usually means, as Dilys rightly says, think the place is in a frightful mess and upside down. Usually in the past it referred to bloodthirsty battle scenes where everybody was lying about chopped up in plenty heaps. But it was a butcher's slaughterhouse, and there are streets in a good many towns in England called the Shambles. Denis Norden. He knows how many beans make 5.
Well, it means he's got common sense. He
Yes.
knows his way around.
Yes, that's all right. And originally?
Well, originally, I presume it came from a time when people couldn't estimate how many beans made 5. That must have been when we first sort of crawled out of the water onto dry lands. We didn't have fingers yet. And somebody used to do a thriving trade selling beans in groups of 3 and making a very good profit. That's 5. That's 5 beans. 5 beans each up. 5 beans, they come along and they've got no fingers to count on.
It's some sort of old English country custom, don't
That's
you
it,
think?
yeah.
Yes,
Yes,
it's an English
that's it.
country custom. How
Just
many beans
serve.
make 5? I don't know. Stay there. Wait, I'll put the light out.
And then,
Well,
Very old English country custom, that.
exactly. And they did it to Greensleeves, didn't
That's
they?
right, yeah.
for that
Come mucking out time.
interesting glimpse of prehistory, I'll give you 1.5 marks out of 3, I think. Present meaning, as Denis says, somebody is no fool's got some common sense. comes from an old joke or riddle, not a very good one, I don't think. The questioner asked how many beans make 5, and when he was given the correct answer, he would then go on to say, but how many blue beans make 5 white ones? And the answer is 5 if you peel them. Now, on to Anne Scott James. The phrase unearned increment.
It simply means unearned money.
Yes, near enough. And originally?
Well, would it be something to do with crops, that if you...
No, it's not crops. You're getting near.
Oh, it means weeds. It means something that you haven't sown. Is that it?
No, I'm going to give you, again,
dear. Not
one mark. I think it'd be fair this time. It now means any money that comes to you without your having done a stroke of work for it. And that's all right, Anne got that right. But originally it referred to a particular kind of windfall. If you owned a bit of land and it suddenly increased enormously in value, not because of anything you'd done, but because somebody found coal or oil under it, or because they suddenly had a building development
property
on it.
Developers.
Yes,
The early
or
property
they
developers.
wanted to put a railway through it. That was unearned increment. It suddenly went up in value, and you hadn't lifted a finger. I think that one would be fair. Frank Muir, and this may encourage you, I fear, sea shanties.
Sea shanties are oh, no fair lady, all believe in Cheyenne, and so forth and so forth, and hold me bullies in me hearties, and lean on the capstan, and drag up the anchor. And they are songs that sailors used to sing. They're work songs of maritime people.
Yes.
That's their present meaning, which is a past meaning. And what?
Yes. Why did you sing the song while you were working?
Because it gave you a rhythm.
Yes, that's what I wanted. 3 marks it is. Songs sung by sailors doing a job which involved a number of them trying to pull together with a solo by the shantyman or leader, and then alternating with a chorus. And the idea was that the rhythm of the music helped the capstan to come round smoothly and the anchor to be up to whatever it was. Comes from the French word, obviously, chanter, or singing. Well, in the next round, it's about books, and some of the best known and perhaps some of the best loved books in the world are about animals. But do you know who wrote them? For 2 marks, give me the authors of the following animal stories. Beginning with Dilys Powell, Garm, a hostage.
Garm?
They're animals.
Yes, definitely.
Animals?
Canine Doyle.
Yes?
Yeah.
Well, yes, we've got the right animal. That's all right so far. It's a rather oriental dog, this one.
Oh, Oriental dog. Kipling.
Yes, Garm a Hostage, story by Rudyard Kipling. The drunken soldier left his dog with the narrator, and it was a pathetic and a touching story in which, in the end, he gives the dog back. And
What should we do with the drunken soldier?
Never leave your dog with a narrator, if possible.
No, he went on for quite a long time, Dennis. Now, Denis Norden, Lassie Come Home.
Is it Eric Bentley? No, Eric
Eric.
Bentley writes on drama.
Now, Eric is right.
Eric Knight.
Eric Knight, it is 2 marks. Anne Scott James, White Fang.
Oh, Jack London.
Jack London, it is 2 marks. Frank Muir, The Tale of Mrs. Tiggywinkle.
Great books of the world. Beatrix Potter.
Beatrix Potter, I am informed.
Yes?
Is it?
And what was Mrs. Tiggywinkle?
It's an animal. For a ducat.
It's a mouse. No, wait a minute. Hedgehog, I think.
Yes.
It's your
Mrs.
point,
Tiggywinkle
Quite
was
right.
a hedgehog.
The Tale of Mrs. Tiggywinkle was by Beatrix Potter, and Mrs. Tiggywinkle was an admirable hedgehog who lived under cat bells just the other side of Borrowdale. And the next round is all about nouns of assembly. Things like a school of porpoises, or a charm of goldfinches, or a bench of magistrates, and so on. 2 marks if you get them right. Dilys Powell, eggs.
Eggs? A clutch.
Yes, quite right. Denis Norden, onions.
String.
Well, very nearly. Make it a bit bigger.
Rope.
Right.
A
Yes.
rope. Rope of onions.
A rope of onions. These nice Bretons
Breton
and
sellers,
Normans who
yes.
come round with bicycles and sell them in ropes. Anne Scott James, trees.
Clump of trees.
Clump, stand, grove would do. Frank Muir, bread.
Bread? A loaf?
No.
bread. A baking.
Bread.
Baking.
A baking of bread. A shovel of bread.
That sort of thing.
A tin of bread.
No,
An oven of bread.
yes, what you put in the oven. Shush! You're being helped.
Inspiration has suddenly dawned. It's a batch of bread. Yeah. A batch of bread.
1 out of 2. And that's generous. A batch of bread it is. And now we come to the last round and go back to those quotations I gave the two teams earlier on in the program. Dilys Powell, first of all, for 2 marks. I'd like the origin of your quotation. She's my sweetheart, I'm her beau.
It's a song.
Yeah?
She is my Annie, I'm a Joe.
It's Sweet Annie
She's
something.
my sweetheart.
Yes, Sweet Annie
I'm
something,
her
certainly. But I want to know what it is.
Sweet Annie Rooney?
Yes.
Rooney.
Sung by Michael Nolan on all sorts of music halls around about 1890. She's my Annie, I'm her Joe. She's my sweetheart, I'm her beau. Soon we'll marry, never to part. Little Annie Rooney is my sweetheart. Now, Anne Scott James, the origin of your quotation, please. Actions speak louder than words.
It's a tremendously smug sentiment, isn't it?
Yes.
And I think it's by my favourite author,
Yes,
Anon.
Yes, I think that's good enough. It's traditional, proverbial, anonymous. It appears in proverbial literature in almost all languages. Well, now I shall ask Frank and Denis to give me their explanations of how these quotations came into being. And this time, the marks will go to whichever incredible explanation gets the longer amount of applause from the audience here in the theatre. So, back to Frank Muir with his quotation, she's my sweetheart, I'm her beau.
Some great man whose name escapes me at the moment, Socrates or Stan Marshall or it was Benjamin Franklin, said that if you can build a better mousetrap, the world will beat a path to your door. I speak without my books. Give a word or two, that was a quotation. I'd like you to know that I have invented a better mousetrap. It isn't even a trap. It is a humane way to kill mice. If you have mice, listen to me, I know how to cure it. I have studied the mouse as a mouse for a considerable time, since last Thursday. And I've studied it very carefully, and I know how to defeat it. I can beat it at its own game. Now, a mouse sort of nibbles things. Nibble, 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 nibble. Nibble, 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 nibble. When it doesn't eat the whole of the thing, it leaves sort of a row of little tiny sort of dents along the cheese. It is known zoologically as a rodent. Mice are very timid creatures. This is one of the secrets of my successful humane killer of mice. Extremely timid. A sudden clap of thunder, or if you jerk your elbows together loudly, like that, that is enough to give a mouse a kind of paralytic fit, enough to kill him. Now, knowing these two ingredients, a mouse's feeding habits, and the fact that any sudden shock will destroy him, here is how you destroy your mouse humanely. Cheese, first of all. Cheese can't beat cheese with mice. Cheese to tempt him out of his hole. Now, the other delicacy a mouse loves are the kernels, the germ of wheat. You know, you get a whole lot of wheat and you rub it in your hands and get all the husks off until you're left with the heart of the wheat. You then lay a little trail from the cheese along through the kitchen, through that rotten, draughty passage we've got. And then you go into the drawing room. Then you lie full length on the ground in an Angora pullover. It's most essential. And you put little bits of this heart of wheat along your arm, deep in the Angora, and you lie flat on the ground and wait. Now, be very quiet, not a breath. Eventually the mouse will come out, eat the cheese. Ha-ha, that's the aperitif. Where is the main meal, your Mr. Mouse will say. Spots the wheat germ, the heart of the wheat. Eats it, goes along, eats a bit more, goes along, eats a bit more, eventually comes up your arm. He is now in a jungle of Angora, fur. You see, he can't see you. He comes within 2 inches of your face. And then you go, ha! Like that. Have you ever been in bed with an Angora bed jacket? But when you hurl along Angora, it parts and makes a little sort of footpath. The mouth will then be staring you face to face, and you say, boo! To the mouse. He is so stunned by this that he gives a little quiver of fright and drops dead. I've proved it. It is quite humane. He feels nothing, madam. It's a lovely way to go. So do try it. Just follow my plan. Follow the ingredients and the modus operandi, and that is my infallible humane mouse killer. Just to give you the thing in details, it's cheese, mice, wheat heart, arm, ha, bow.
Well, I'm expecting to hear terrible reports of animal cruelty coming from near Egham in Surrey. We'll go on to Denis Norden, and if you remember, his quotation was, "Actions speak louder than words."
Well, ever since this program started, it's been introduced as a word game played by people whose business is words. And a lot of you may have thought to yourself, what does he mean, that man? People whose business is words. Well, now, I can reveal to you exactly why we were called that, because at the time, that is what our business was. Our business was words. We were all of us, you might describe us as word sharps. And the greatest of us was Dilys Powell. She was a word sharp. Diamond Dill, they call her. She was the greatest. Take on anybody at anything. But she gave it up that night when suddenly the tension got too much. She was at her usual corner table in Soho. Suddenly this big Rolls came to the door. It was this rich gambler who lived in Knightsbridge. He'd heard about Diamond Dill. He wanted to match himself against her. She was taken to Knightsbridge, and he says, "I hear you're pretty good at word games." "Yeah." He says, "Okay, Scrabble, £5 a letter." She said, "Good enough. Dirty words can't double." Right. They played far into the night. He lost £30,000 to her. He said, "All right, let's go on to something a bit more advanced." He said, "Can you play consonants?" You ever played the consonant game? Have to get words. I'll explain to you as I go along, actually. You set each other problems in words. He said to her, "Tell me a 15-letter word in which no letter is used more than once. Double or nothing for the 30,000. Moment's pause. She said, "Uncopyrightable." Don't bother to check it, it's right. He paled. He said, "Okay, on to the consonant game proper. Give me a word where two consonants follow one another." She said, "Find." Right, ND. He said, "Right." Now, the way this game goes is that she then challenges him. She said, "Give me a word where three consonants follow one another." Pause. The room was quiet. You could only hear the breathing. He said, "Raspberry." SPB. He could have said dumbfounded, which is the same. His turn to ask her. He said, "Give me a word where four consonants follow one another." Now it was getting tough. This separated the men from the boys now. She said, "Strength." NGTH. He paled. He knew she was good. He never knew she was that good. Now it was her turn to ask him. Remorselessly, she pressed on. "All right. 5 consonants following one another." He thought. No, he'd failed. And he had to challenge her. She said, "Strength less." NGTHL. Well, she'd won the lot. All he'd got. He said, one last throw. One last throw. I'll give the house as well in Knightsbridge. 6 consonants following one another. Now, she hadn't expected this. She'd been up all night round the coffee bars, playing. She thought she had 30 seconds. If she failed to think of the word in 30 seconds, she'd lost the lot. And suddenly, a fellow standing by gave her a little tap on the shin. She looked, and he just looked, indicated out the window, and the dawn was breaking. She couldn't see. She couldn't see what he meant. He kicked her again on the shin. Nodded. Look, look. She looked. She could see the rooftops of Knightsbridge, the sun coming up over that tanning factory they got down there. She couldn't see. He kicked her again. He kicked her 8 times before she caught on. 6 consonants following one another. She said it. Knightsbridge. GHTSBR. She won the lot. She's never played again. She only plays panel games now. And she's always believed. Now, hacked shins speak louder than words.
Well, by your vote, Denis Norden wins the contest of stories, and I shall never dare to speak to Dilys again. And that brings us to a final score in which, nevertheless, Dilys Powell and Frank Muir win by 2 marks from Anne Scott James and Denis Norden, and this also brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC. The BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and those taking part are Anne Scott James, Dilys Powell, Denis Norden, and Frank Muir. Here's round 1 to test their vocabulary. 2 marks if they get the meanings of these words right. Beginning with Anne Scott James. Anne, what is an eland? E-L-A-N-D.
Eland. Oh, hoppity hop.
Yes, hoppity hop very much.
An animal.
Yes?
Deer family, widely distributed. I've seen them in Kenya.
Oh.
I really have.
I didn't know they went as far north as that, but maybe they do.
They go leaping and bounding across the road.
Yes, what do you call that kind of thing that does that?
I thought it was New Zealand if you cut off the news.
Not quite deer.
Deer family, is
Deer
it not?
family, yes.
I did say deer family.
You did say deer family?
Yes, it's an eland, which is a member of the deer family.
All right. It's an antelope. That's what I was trying to wring from you. A rather heavily built antelope. And the Dutch word means elk, which means an enormous sort of deer. but it's South African mainly, but you're probably right, and it probably is in Kenya, but I didn't know. Frank Muir, what is passion?
Passion? I thought everybody knew this. It's the Afghanistan shepherd's word for a passionate ram.
You're 3 parts of the way there.
3 parts of the way there with a passionate ram. The rest of the story is non-you.
I'll give you 1 for passionate ram, curiously enough. It means the underfur of hairy quadrupeds in Tibet and similar places, and it's used for cashmere shawls. 1 out of 2. Passion. All right. Dilys Powell, what is an oligarchy?
An oligarchy. Oligos, oligi, not many, few.
Yes.
Archy or archos or something or other, rule.
Yes.
Rule by a few.
Absolutely right. Government by the few, or a state governed by a few people, or members of such a government. Well done. 2 marks. Denis Norden, what is an umiak? U-M-I-A-K. U-M-I-A-K. Umiak.
I only hope this word turns out to be as useful as passion. The underside of a ram.
It's jolly...
Umiak.
Umiak.
Oh, no, we were talking... Oh, yes. We
I think
were
we talked
talking about Tibet, weren't we?
Yes.
Well, as you know, Jack, because you've been to Tibet, haven't you? It's been taken over by Chinese, and they've got traffic meters there now. And when a Tibetan parks his yak, if he leaves it too long, he'll suddenly clap his hand to his forehead and say, "Ooh, me yak."
Try about 70 degrees of latitude further north.
Try about 70 degrees. Ooh, me whale.
Siberia, this gets
Siberia,
you,
yes.
doesn't it?
Well, that's a bit, yes.
Mongolia.
No, go a bit leftwards.
Russia.
Sorry. I'm trying to help, but I don't think I can.
Don't think anybody can help with
this
that.
is an Eskimo skin boat, which is rowed by the women only. The kayak is the male Eskimo's hunting boat, which only holds 1. The umiak is the great big thing, rather like a punt, in which a man won't be seen dead unless he's too old to hunt in a kayak, and so it's full of women and children and an occasional grandfather. Anywhere in Greenland. No marks for that, I'm sorry. Well, before we start round 2, I give each team a quotation for them to write down, and I want the 2 women members of the team to go on studying their quotations, and then at the end of the programme, I shall ask them where those quotations come from. So beginning with Anne Scott James and Denis, here's your quotation. My old man said, follow the van. And Dilys Powell and Frank Muir, yours is, and thereby hangs a tale. And then at the end of the programme, I shall ask Denis and Frank to give me their idea of how these words came to be said or written. And so to round 2. And this is a round of mythology. 2 marks, get it right. Anne Scott James, I want to know who were the father and mother of Paris and Hector, and over what kingdom did they rule?
Priam.
Yes?
And they ruled over Troy.
Troy, yes.
Dennis Quick, who was Priam's wife.
What's he to?
Oh, what's he to Hecuba?
That's
That
right,
he should
got
weep for her.
it, yes.
1.5, I think. Helped a bit there. Frank Muir, in the same vein, who killed Hector and dragged his body tied by the heels to a chariot 3 times round the walls of Troy?
I'm not going to tell you. You beat me with rubber hoses. I'm no stool pigeon. What are you writing? Oh, was it? The heel was the giveaway there.
The heel's the giveaway.
Yes, it was Achilles.
That's right.
The well-known heel.
Achilles, the Greek champion, revenging the death of his friend Patroclus, who had been killed by Hector, killed Hector in turn and dragged him 3 times round Patroclus' tomb and incidentally round Troy. 2 marks. Dilys Powell, what was the food of the gods, the drink of the gods, and the home of the gods?
The food was ambrosia,
Yes?
the drink was nectar,
Yes?
and the home was Olympus.
Well done. 2 marks it is. Denis Norden, this is a medical question. What was the main physiological difference between Cyclops and Argus?
Oh, I think I should have a second opinion. Well, Cyclops had one eye in the middle,
Yes.
like a television set, and Argus was he had 1,000 eye. No, that was the peacock. 100 eye.
Absolutely.
Argus.
Yes, well done. Cyclops was a nasty sort of giant, son of Inachus. So there were, I think, 3 or 4 of him, but the one in the Odyssey was called Polymachus, I think. He had one eye right in the middle, and Odysseus killed him by plunging a great stake through the middle of his eye, which was a nasty way to die. Argus had 100 eyes, and when he was finally killed by Apollo, Hera, Zeus's wife, didn't want to waste these eyes, so she put them all into the tail of a peacock. Hence the peacock is what it is. 2 marks. Well, the next round's about poetry and verse, and I give each member of the team a quotation and ask them to complete it with the next line or two. 2 marks if they can complete the quotation, and 2 more for correctly naming the source. Anne Scott James first. It was the English, Caspar cried, who put the French to rout, but what they fought each other for, I could not well make out.
Oh, it was that chap who sat in the sun, wasn't it?
Yes?
Caspar, as we
Yeah.
know. It's by Robert Southey, The
Yes.
Battle of Blenheim.
Battle of Blenheim. And can you complete the quotation?
What was the last line you gave
I
me?
could not well make out. But what they fought each other for, I could not well make out.
Oh, yes,
Famous victory, quoth he.
Yes, I think that's good enough. This is in fact how it goes. It was the English, Caspar cried, who put the French to rout, but what they fought each other for I could not well make out. But everybody said, quoth he, that 'twas a famous victory. I think that's near enough. And it is The Battle of Blenheim by Robert Southey. 4 marks. It's a dialogue between old Caspar and this little Peterkin. Frank Muir. Here's a health unto his majesty with a fal lal la 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 la. Conversion to his enemies with a fal lal la 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 la. Very difficult, this.
What do you want me to do?
Go on, go on.
Go on. Oh, the finish. There goes. With a fal la 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 la. With a fal la 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 la.
I did that bit.
I want didn't. Didn't. You did with a fal lal lal la lal. I did.
La la
with a
la.
fal lal lal la 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 la. The rallentando.
Who will not drink his health?
He who will not drink his health.
I wish him.
Write faster, write faster. I wish him neither wit nor wealth.
Yes.
More coming, hang on.
That's enough. That's 2 lines.
Or something, nor rope to hang himself with a fa la 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 with a fa la 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 la. Sort of a duet there.
Splendid, Frank, and author apart from Frank Muir.
Oh, this goes back a bit,
Fred
Jack.
asked.
Yes. Charles II, wasn't it?
No.
It's a very favourite author of yours.
Is that Rochester?
I've done my best. It's 2 marks for your spirited rendering. It's by anon or traditional.
Dirty trick.
Naughty.
And just to get it right, and he that will not pledge his health, I wish him neither wit nor wealth, nor yet a rope to hang himself with a fal lal la 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 la. That's right, I think. Now, Dilys Powell. When blood is nipped and ways befoul, when nightly sings the staring owl, to woo, to wit, to woo, a merry note.
When roasted
Greasy Joan doth keel the pote.
Absolutely right. By
Shakespeare.
in what play? It's not absolutely essential.
Well, don't do it then.
No, that's I pass.
Your life.
No, I don't.
It's a difficult one, I think, this.
Is it?
While greasy Joan doth keel the pot. And I always thought that meant clean it, but it doesn't. It means cool it. How she did it, except blowing on it, I don't know. And it's Shakespeare, and it's a song in Love's Labour's Lost, and it ends off the play. Denis Norden. Early beacon, oh, the weary haunt for me, all alone on early beacon.
Lost, Jack. Absolutely. It wouldn't be the flip side to fal la la. It's all Lombard Street to a China orange, and it's called Early Beacon.
Yes, it's called Early Beacon, that's fair enough.
All right, I'll salvage that from the wreck.
Yes, you've got there.
And retire.
And it's a very familiar story, this. You've had him lots of times, you always hate him, and he will say he writes doggerel.
Doggerel.
Doing my best. No, I think 1 mark would be adequate here. Early beacon, oh, the weary haunt for me, all alone on early beacon with his baby on my knee.
Oh.
It's the girl had been deserted, and it is Early Beacon, and it's by Charles Kingsley. 1, I think, is fairly generous. Well, the next round is all about kings, expressions including the word king, like the king of beasts being the lion, or the lion being the king of beasts. 2 marks if you get these right. Anne Scott James, the king of the forest.
It must be an oak.
Yes, 2 marks. Oak. Frank Muir, the books of the 4 kings.
Playing cards?
Yes.
The books of the 4 kings?
The books of the 4 kings
The
are
suits.
a pack of playing cards. 2 marks. Dilys Powell, the king of the waters.
Very large fish.
No,
Not
very
large.
large something, but not fish.
Very large something, not a fish.
What that very large fish that swims about it?
King of the waters, brandy.
What?
Brandy.
No marks at all. It's the Amazon.
An ocean.
The river Amazon. Denis Norden, the king of Bath.
Bath, the place.
Yes.
Oh, that was Bow. What am I? Bow Legs. No, Bow Nash.
Yes, Bow Nash it was. Master of ceremonies for 56 years at the town of Bath. Bow Nash. 2 marks. Well done. On previous occasions, we've had rounds about words which are used to describe a gathering of birds or animals. And now for 2 marks, I want this word of assembly for these following gatherings. Anne Scott James, a gathering of labourers.
A trade union meeting, I should think.
I don't think they're actually labouring then.
Something of labour. A work gang, isn't it?
Yes.
A work gang or something.
Just gang.
Oh, just gang.
A gang of labourers.
But sometimes they're too easy.
Yes, they are
Sometimes they're
too
too
easy.
difficult, but they're never just right.
Well, this is fairly easy. 2 marks it is. Frank Muir, magistrates.
A sleep of magistrates. They're the bench, aren't they?
Yes, they're a bench of magistrates. There's more than one. Dilys Powell, angels.
The host.
Quite right. 2 marks. Denis Norden, runners, either 2 or 4-legged.
Oh, I was going to say half a pound of runners. A whole lot of runners.
Yeah.
A team of runners.
No, that would be on one side only.
2 teams of
They're
A
more than that.
relay of runners.
really. Yeah.
No, that's a special kind of race.
Oh, wait a minute. If it's horses, it's
Evens on.
the field.
Yes,
isn't
you got
It's
it.
the
That's
field.
why I helped you.
Oh,
2
right.
marks. A field of runners, whether horses or other kinds of runners too. And now we come to the last round and go back to those quotations I gave the 2 teams earlier on in the programme. So for 2 marks, Anne Scott James, can you give me the origin of your quotation? My old man said, follow the van.
Well, it takes me back to when I was young and used to go to the music hall, I think.
Yes?
It's a Mary Lloyd song.
Quite right. It was sung by Mary Lloyd. It was a famous song of hers. It was, in fact, written by 2 chaps called Collins and Lee. And now Dilys Powell, I like the origin of your quotation, and thereby hangs a tale.
Shakespeare.
What play?
Othello?
Yes. It'll do. It, in fact, is used
It'll
in
do.
four plays of Shakespeare, so you had plenty of choice. It's in As You Like It, The Melancholy Jaques. It's in The Taming of the Shrew. It's in The Merry Wives of Windsor, but it's also in Othello. So well done. 2 marks you get. And now I shall ask Denis and Frank to give me their explanation of how these quotations came into being, and on this occasion the marks will go to whichever incredible explanation receives the longer amount of applause from the audience here in the theatre. So, first of all, back to Denis Norden with his quotation, "My old man said, follow the van."
When I was at school, I had a headmaster who refused to let me learn French the way that the other boys learnt it. All that he allowed me to learn was the present tense. Now, he had a reason for this. He figured that I would never amount to anything, and that if I ever did manage to get in a position where I could afford to go to France, it would only be on a day trip. Well, you know the position that you're in on a day trip. You weren't here yesterday. You're not going to be there tomorrow. So all you need is the present tense, which is what I learned. And I can now speak French fluently, but only in the present tense, which puts me in a very difficult position when I go to France, which I do, and sometimes for as long as 36 hours, despite the headmaster's feelings about it, because knowing only the present tense, I can only make acquaintances, I mustn't make friends. You see what I mean? I can't get in a position with anybody, with any Frenchman, where he might say to me, "What are you doing tomorrow?" or "What did you do last night?" Because I'd have to use the future tense or the past tense, and I can't do it. I just have to move on to the next town. So my acquaintance with Frenchmen is limited to people who I only want to meet once, and who only want to meet me once. And that way you meet some very strange Frenchmen. Now, all this is merely by way of explanation of how I came to meet this particular Frenchman, who I've always thought of as the reluctant wine taster. That's what he was. He was a wine taster. I came to meet him because I was in this town, in the wine country, and I wanted to bring back a couple of bottles of Beaune wine, and I didn't know what was a decent brand, and they said to me, "Well, that fellow sitting over there, the melancholy-looking one, his name's Pierre, and he's a wine taster, and he will pick one for you and tell you." So I went over to him and I said, sort of jauntily, "I have a bone to pick with you." And he didn't laugh at all, either, and he said, "It's no good coming to me, monsieur, because Beaune is a red wine, and I am a white wine taster." Oh, I said, you like white wine? He said, "I hate it." So I said, "But you're a wine taster." He said, "Yes, but I hate wine." He said, "And all day long, doing nothing but drinking wine, white wine, bottle after bottle of white wine, and I loathe it." And I said, "But if you loathe wine, why are you a wine taster?" He said, "Because my father made me take it up." He said, "He is a wine taster. His grandfather was a wine taster. All my ancestors have been wine tasters back to the time of King Philippe the Lecherous." He said, and he wouldn't allow me to go into any other profession. I said, "Well, what other profession do you?" He said, "I want to be a tea taster." They said, "My father won't let me." In French, it's, "My father will not permit me not." And I thought, how strange. This is one of the strange encounters that I would never have run across if I knew the past tense, the future tense. It's only because of this sort of talking to strangers, making acquaintances, not friends. And I said to him, "Very strange. Life is indeed a fickle jade. If you can say fickle jade in French, perhaps you can sit there looking at me a bit more respectfully." But I said to him, "Life is indeed a fickle jade." And he said, "It is indeed, monsieur. That here am I would have made perhaps a good tea taster, maybe a noble coffee taster, a magnifique cocoa taster. But no, my old man said, swallow the van.
I hope some nice chap will take that poor man some coffee beans. Now we go on to Frank Muir, and if you remember, his quotation was, and thereby hangs a tale.
We have these friends up in the Western Highlands who've got this sheep farm right on the side of a hill. And my wife and I had a few days off. So we decided to drive up to Scotland and go and see them. And so I drove, my wife navigated, just for efficiency, and up we went towards Scotland. The first time I've seen Cardiff. It's a terribly nice... All those dots and the hills behind, it's awfully sweet. Then we decided to abandon the map, which I discovered was of the inland waterways and wasn't a road map. And we were very soon in Scotland, and there in Argyllshire, just on the shores of Loch Linnhe, was this little 7,000-acre sheep station. Now, my friend Tony, I was very glad I arrived, because on the Sunday, it was pouring with rain, and they had to shift 17 sheep from the farmyard where they were gathered and take them about 3 miles away to another part of the glen. You can get 16 in the bottom of the trailer, and then you put the rest in the sort of second layer. Well, the shepherd got 16 in, with their behind parts just about level where the board would go, and there was one sheep over. It was a lamb, it was a gentleman lamb, and Raymond the shepherd said, would I mind doing it, while he went and fetched the car and backed it on the trailer. I stood there, looking at this lamb, how to get it up onto the shelf. Rain falling off me. I stood in the mud, sizing up the lamb. He looked at me. I lifted, and I sank slowly into the mud until Angus, this little lamb, was roughly where he was. And I was up to my knees in this mud. Well, there's a sound like a rhinoceros kissing its mate, and I got one leg up. And a similar sound when I got the other leg up. Then I went rest and got a plank. I tried pushing him, and his legs went rigid. I tried cursing him. Angus, get in there! I ran round him barking like a sheepdog. Ow, 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 ow! He just stared at me. Too heavy to lift, what to do? Inspiration. Dashed into the house, took 4 casters off an old Victorian sofa I had, got some sticky tape from the medicine cabinet, rushed back, put the 4 casters on Angus, and pushed him, wheeled him up the plank and into the top layer. Pulled the plank away, was just about to lift the backboard up, when I realised that the trailer was pointing slightly uphill, and Angus was trundling back towards the end. So I gave him a push, a very quick push, bent down, bang, tight, the tailboard. And then, oh, the memory. I wasn't quite quick enough. Angus had rolled back just that much, and his little tail got cracked and cut it off. I cut the tail off this poor little sheep. I haven't been able to sleep. If he tries to sit down, it'll... Terrible thought. And then, coming to the show this evening, there was just a hope. The shops were closing, and as I was driving, out of the corner of my eye, it's a bookshop, I think. I think the chap must be a shepherd as a sideline or something, but because it said, for sale cheap, lamb's tails. From Shakespeare, which I think that village in the Cotswolds. But now it's okay, because he'll be all right. Because tomorrow morning, I'm going to find that shop, and there, buy Angus a tail.
Well, I always wondered why Highland sheep looked so surprised. And by your vote, Frank Muir wins the contest of the 2 stories, and also his team win by 2 marks from Anne Scott James and Denis Norden. And this also brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC. The BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and those taking part are Anne Scott James, Dilys Powell, Denis Norden, and Frank Muir. Round 1, to test their vocabulary. 2 marks if they can give me the meaning of the following words. And we begin with you, Dilys. Dilys Powell, what is scree? S-C-R-E-E.
It's something which you meet when you're going out for a walk in the mountains and you find yourself sliding down instead of walking up.
That might have been snow.
It's not snow, it's not wet, it's
No.
dry. It's kind of something like shale. It's very
Yes.
sort of small bits of stone which slide about.
Quite right.
It's very disagreeable to walk on.
Yes, it's either the slope on which this thing is, or it's the thing itself, that is, mountain slope covered with small stones which slide and roll when they're trodden on. That's perfectly true. 2 marks, and it's very unpleasant. Denis Norden, the meaning of the word ptosis. P-T-O-S-I-S.
Fall down.
PTOSIS would be, you know, that affliction of people who cannot get everything they want to say on one side of a postcard. They suffer from PTOsis.
It is an affliction. I'm almost going to give you half a mark for that, but it's not the right
Jack,
kind of affliction.
You should give way. It's wrong to repress these things that you have, because it only comes out in later life.
Something shaky, do you think?
You haven't got all that much later life.
No, I haven't.
Something shaky, do you think?
Yes, it is something
shaky.
Yes.
Yes.
You're quite right. It's a drooping of the upper eyelid due to paralysis of the elevator muscle. In other words, an inability to refrain from winking. Anne Scott James, what is a tonsure? T-O-N-S-U-R-E, tonsure.
Oh. Well, I think really of tonsure, it's something, it's usually a monk's haircut, isn't it? A very short
That's it.
hairdo.
It's the shaving of a circular patch in the crown of the head, or sometimes the whole head, usually as a religious practice, and some orders of priesthood and of monks have it, too.
You get it also in the East when you get terribly tall priests and electric fans.
All right, I'll give you one now, Frank. Frank Muir, what is isocracy? I-S-O-C-R-A-C-Y, isocracy.
It's to do with the secrecy surrounding the rules of ice hockey.
The rule bit is right.
The other meaning is iso is Greek, Dilys.
Same, equal.
Back me up.
The same, equal.
Means equal, like democratic democracy.
Yes, that's it. It's equal rule, a system in which all the people have equal power. 2 marks, well done. Well, before we begin round 2, I now give each team a quotation, which they can write down, And I want the two women members of the team to keep on studying their quotations, and then at the end of the program, I ask them where those two quotations come from. Dilys Powell and Frank Muir, here's your quotation: "Wonders will never cease." And Anne Scott James and Denis, yours is, "Our fears do make us traitors." And then at the end of the program, I shall ask Frank and Denis to give me their ideas of how these words came to be said or written. And so round two, I want you for 2 marks to give me the other character who made up the romantic relationship with the character that I shall name. And an extra mark if you can name the author and the work in which both characters appear. Dilys Powell, John Ridd.
Lorna Doone.
In the novel by?
Blackmore.
Yes, 3 marks. Well done. Denis Norden, Minnehaha.
Well, when her sweetheart came, he would say, "Hiya, Minnie," and she would say, "Hiya, Whopper."
That should be quite right. And by?
By Longfellow.
Poem by Longfellow, Hiya, Whopper. 3 marks it is. Anne Scott James, Barkis, B-A-R-K-I-S.
Ah, the man who was always willing. Barkis is willing is, I
Yes.
think, from David Copperfield.
Yes, it is. Do you remember the name of the girl or woman? You've got 2 out of 3 already.
Only 2 out of 3 for all that. By Charles Dickens, do I get 3 for that? 3rd for that.
No, it is in David Copperfield, and Barkis was always sending messages to Clara Peggotty, saying Barkis is willing, and he meant he wanted to marry her, and it went on and on and on. 2.5, I think, Anne, out of that. Frank Muir, Sophia Weston.
Yes, it wasn't so much a romantic attachment as a union. Sophia Weston, yes, very beautiful girl, mid-18th century. Her father was a rough-riding squire,
Yes.
always on a horse. Lived at Weston-super-Mare. And her sweetheart was Tom Jones, from the book and film of the same name, by Henry Fielding.
Good.
1741.
3 marks. Tom Jones.
6 volumes.
Well, the next round is poetry. I give each member of each team a quotation and ask them to finish it off, the next line or two. 2 marks if they can complete their quotation, and 2 more for naming its source. Dilys Powell, "I love a lassie, a bonny, bonny lassie."
She's as pure as the lily in the glen.
Over to you, partner. What was that again? She's as pure as a something, something, something. Harry Lauder.
Yes?
Harry Lauder's song, which I never, I'm sorry to say, heard, except, rendered by other people. And how does it go on, Frank?
I don't know, I can't go back. I
Well,
love
let's have
a bonny purple heather, and my Scots bluebell.
Yes, I think we got all there.
I think so.
Between you.
Yes.
Yes, 4 marks, I think. "I love a lassie, a bonny, bonny lassie. She's as pure as the lily in the dell. She's as sweet as the heather, the bonny blooming heather. Mary, my Scotch bluebell." Harry Lauder and another chap I didn't know much about called Gerald Grafton, but I think that's all right. Denis Norden. "Oh, the gladness of her gladness when she's glad, and the sadness of her sadness when she's sad."
This is Barry,
Yes.
and it's awful. I don't know, it's something about the gladness of her gladness when she's glad, and the sadness of her sadness when she's sad, but the gladness of her gladness and the sadness of her sadness and the badness of her badness when she's bad. Cha-cha-cha.
Well, you left out the cha-cha-cha, which comes as the last line but one, but I think that's good enough, and I couldn't bear to have you do it again. Rosalind by J.M. Barrie. The gladness of her gladness when she's glad, and the sadness of her sadness when she's sad, but the gladness of her gladness and the sadness of her sadness are as nothing, Charles, the character who appears for the first time, to the badness of her badness when she's bad.
Charles.
Terrifyingly whimsy, and you get 4 marks for it. Anne Scott James. "Scatter as from an unextinguished hearth ashes and sparks my words among mankind, be through my lips to unawakened earth the trumpet of a prophecy, O wind.
Why have you got it in for me? You give them delicious pop songs. And me, I'm absolutely beaten by this one.
Slightly,
help, partner.
Slightly pre-pop song, this one, yes.
Yes.
Shelley.
Yes.
If winter comes.
Yes.
Is it?
Yes.
If winter comes, can spring be far behind?
Fair enough. Ode to the West Wind or Wind by Shelley, and it runs like that. Be through my lips to unawakened earth the trumpet of a prophecy, O wind, if winter comes, can spring be far behind. And the first 3 lines of that last line were famous bestseller in my youth by A.S.M. Hutchinson.
Yeah.
4 marks. Frank Muir. Come cheer up, my lads, 'tis to glory we steer.
Hearts of oak are our men.
Hearts of oak are our ships, hearts of oak are our men. Ready, boys.
Steady,
Steady,
boys. Steady,
ready,
boys.
ready.
Steady.
Steady, boys. Steady. We'll fight and we'll conquer again and again. Inexplicably by David Garrick.
Come cheer up, my lads, 'tis to glory we steer, to add something more to this wonderful year. To honor we call you, not press you like slaves, for who are so free as the sons of the waves? Heart of oak are our ships, heart of oak are our men. We always are ready. Steady, boys, steady. We'll fight and we'll conquer again and again. David Garrick. Nowadays, we refer to lots of things by initials, particularly sort of technical and complicated matters, putting together either the initial letters or parts of the words, for instance, NATO and motel and smog and so on. I want to know for 2 marks what the following combinations of letters mean. Dilys Powell, AWOL, A-W-O-L.
Absent without leave.
Yes, quite right. Absent without leave or absent without official leave. There are 2 versions of this. 2 marks. Denis Norden, basic, with English at the end of it. Basic, B-A-S-I-C.
I always thought it was just basic, like there are people who are basic. It's the very base of English.
And it came from 2 chaps called Dr. Ogden and
sick.
Professor Richards. It's difficult, this one, Dennis.
Is this R-I-A-R, Richards?
That's it.
Yes.
He and Ogden invented it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't think I can help in this.
Well, I can't, definitely.
It's a form of English with a vocabulary originally of about 600 to 800 words, which is supposed to be a good kind of international language. And BASIC, in fact, stands for British, American, Scientific, International, Commercial. Sorry about that. Anne Scott James, Euromart, E-U-R-O-M-A-R-T.
Must be something to do with the common market or
Yes.
the outer 6.
Almost home and dry, Anne. Let's put it together again and I'll give it you.
Well, it's the European market.
European
Common market.
Common Market, or shortened Euromart. 2 marks. Frank Muir, flak.
Oh, it's anti-aircraft fire.
And why?
It's a corruption of the German. Fliegen.
Flieger, yes, that's the start of it. It is the German word for anti-aircraft gun or cannon, Flieger, Abwehr, Kanone. And if we take again the initial letters there, you get flak. Now, in the next round, I'm going to give the team, each of them, the opening lines of Shakespeare plays. And for 2 marks, I want to know what the play is, and a bonus mark if they can tell me who spoke the lines. Beginning with Dilys Powell. Nay, but this dotage of our generals o'erflows the measure.
Measure for measure.
Antony of Cleopatra.
Antony of Cleopatra. It's very difficult to know who said it, but do you happen to know?
I really don't.
2 out of 3. Nay, but this dotage of our generals o'erflows the measure. It's Philo, who happens to be a friend of Caesar, describing to Demetrius, who was a friend of Antony, how much Antony has gone soft on Cleopatra. Denis Norden, in sooth, I know not why I am so sad.
That's Merchant of Venice.
And the speaker?
Is Antonio.
Yes.
And it's all because he's thinking of his Arguses with portly sail and that.
That's it. Yes, quite right. It's Antonio, the opening line of Merchant of Venice, in sooth I know not why I am so sad, it wearies me, you say it wearies you. It's a rather nice start. Two rather obscure characters called Solanio and Salarino. 3 marks. And Scott James, now fair Hippolyta, our nuptial hour draws on apace.
A Midsummer Night's Dream.
Yes, said by?
Theseus.
That's it. 3 marks. Frank Muir, Sir Hugh, persuade me not. I will make a Star Chamber matter of it.
It's not Hamlet.
Star Chamber might help. Keep it in the right country, anyway.
For England.
Yes.
Star Chamber matter. Many wives. Sir Hugh Evans.
Many wives.
Sir Hugh Evans. And then Falstaff.
That's
and his
right.
infringements. Yes.
And it said to Sir Hugh Evans, as you saw, but
by Mr.
by whom?
Mr. Justice Shylock.
Yes, quite right. You've got it. Well done, Frank. It's the opening lines of The Merry Wives of Windsor. Justice Shallow is speaking to Sir Hugh Evans. Sir Hugh, persuade me not, I will make a Star Chamber matter of it. If he were 20 Sir John Falstaffs, he shall not abuse Robert Shallow, Esquire. Well done. And now we come to the last round and go back to the quotations I gave the 2 teams earlier in the program. For 2 marks, Dilys Powell, will you give me the origin of your quotation, which was, wonders will never cease?
Oh, Jack, I think it's just a saying, isn't it?
Now, it's a saying, but it is attributed to one particular chap, and you have mentioned him earlier on in this program.
What kind of profession?
He's good on the
is he?
stage.
Oh, an actor. Garrick. It's always Garrick.
Yes, it's always Garrick, and I helped you rather a lot, and therefore I think half a mark rather than 1 would be appropriate. And now, Anne Scott James, the origin of your quotation, please, which was, our fears do make us traitors.
I think it's from Macbeth.
Quite right. And now I'm going to ask Frank and Denis to give me their explanation of how these quotations came into being. And on this occasion, the marks will go to whichever unlikely explanation receives the longer amount of applause from the audience here in the theatre. So back to Frank Muir with the quotation, wonders will never cease.
Well, it is quite extraordinary, this, because this was said to me by my son, Jamie David Garrick Muir. Only yesterday he said, "It's true, Father, wonders will never cease." Now, why he said it? Yes, well, it's because of people are always coming up and asking me things in the street, usually questions about my personal appearance. A while back, a man stopped me in the road and said, "It's rather extraordinary. Have you realized you've got rather a small nose for your size of body?" Well, of course I have, you know. And it has been a rather source of worry to me, because it used to be rather long. Nothing gross, nothing excessive, but about half an inch longer than it is now. And this regression of my nose is a little bit awkward, because it's upset my balance. I stand differently, of course. I find the heels of my shoes are wearing out quicker. And I know the reason. The reason is because I keep banging my nose into doors. I've never been able to master doors, particularly double doors. I walk rather swiftly, you know. When I come to double doors, I stretch my arm out to its full limit, raise my palm at right angles to my arm, and push. Crash! I failed to notice a small sign which says, "Please use other door." I realized that my nose had been driven in. Only about, I suppose, 1/10 of an inch, but definitely smaller. And this is really getting rather worrying, because if I'm left with no nose at all, when I get older and wish to wear pince nez, I'll have no nez on which to pants. It really is very worrying. And I realized that what has really hastened this deterioration of my nose extension, what has de-extended my nose recently, was our front door at home, because it sticks, and you never know when it sticks and when it doesn't stick. And in the morning, knowing that it sticks, I grab the handle, give a tremendous heave, and it's non-stick morning. Crash against my nose. Well, you know,
twice a day for over 2 years my nose has had this bashing, and it really is getting more tip-tilted and smaller than ever. Then my son, David Garrick, came out with a piece of paper. He drew me on one side, then turned the paper over and drew me on the other side. They were both silhouettes. And he said, "Do you realize, Father, that your nose is getting small?" I said, "Yes, I do." He said, "It's to do with that front door, isn't it?" So I said, "Yes, it sticks." I said, "I've had 7 new front doors, and they all stick. There's no cure, I'm sure." He said, "Father, you're not being very intelligent about this, are you? It's new wood. New wood is unseasoned, Father, and it expands on a humid day and contracts when the humidity is less. Consequently, it keeps seizing up in the door frame." He said, "Father, you must get a new door." I said, "It's 7 new front doors we've had. It costs money. Wood doesn't grow on trees, you know." I spoke to him very severely. He said, "Father, you must get a new front door, but an old one, a second-hand one, a worn front door. Then all the wood is smooth, and it's seasoned, and it will neither shrink nor will it swell. And once it's fitted, you'll be able to walk in and out easily." And this I did, and it's absolutely true. It works perfectly. So, listeners, those of you whose noses are getting smaller because of banging them into the front door, do get yourself a new door, but do get a second-hand one. Then you'll find it will not seize up. As my son, David Garrick Muir, said only to me last night, "Worn doors will never seize."
Well, I always wondered where Jamie got his intelligence from. It must be Polly, his mother. Now we go back to Denis Norden, and as you remember, his quotation was, "Our fears do make us traitors."
The story I'm going to tell is of an amazing revenge, an astonishing sequel, and why I get in the pictures for nothing. You see, there was this chap who's the father of a friend of mine, and he had this pathological hatred for British Railways because, well, you know that thing you're not supposed to do while the train is standing in a station? He had done it. And they took him to court, and they fined him 40 shillings. However much he protested, my hands were so dirty I had to wash them. They fined him 40 shillings. And he came out of court, and he made a great vow. He said, "Though it take me 40 years, 40 times 40 will British Railways repay." And he went from that court straight home and got his wife with child. That is to say, he got his wife and he got his child at the same time. They both happened to be there. And the child, who is now this friend of mine, George, was then only 1.5 days old. And this father said to the wife, "Ethel, we have not yet registered the birth of that child. It's only 1.5 days old, and we are not going to register the birth of that child." His wife said, "But if we don't register the birth, George will have no birth certificate. Nobody will know, ever, when he was born." And the father said, "Yes, and that is how I will take my revenge, and all I have to do now is wait." 40 years later, brings us to contemporary time. George is a full-grown man, 40 years old, plus a day and a half if you've been following the mathematics of this. And his father rang him up and said, "Right, go." So George got on a railway train, from Brighton to London. And when the inspector came round for the ticket, he tendered a ticket which was a half fare. And the inspector said, "I'm sorry, sir, this is a half fare." I said, "Yes, that's right." He said, "But," he said, "you're an adult." George said, "Prove it." He said, "I'm not interested in that, sir. All I know is I got it." He said, "Prove it." They took him to court. Seen in court, the prosecuting counsel got up. "My lord, this is manifestly an absurd case. The man's travelling on a half fare. He's obviously a man of 40. I ask that he be given the full rigours of the law." And the defence counsel got up and said, "My lord, in this country no man is guilty until he's proved innocent." The judge said, "You've got that wrong, haven't you?" And of course he had. "All you have to do is get this chap's birth certificate. I declare a recess for an hour." Well, of course, no birth certificate. The British Railways couldn't prove that the man was over 12. Case was dismissed. And thenceforth, George has travelled the length and breadth of Britain on railways, all the time travelling half fare, and he has now recovered 40 times 40 shillings from British Railways. Now, this may seem a foolproof scheme to anybody, except I must warn you. There are these people called British Railway Police, and this is the price that George pays whenever he goes to pictures where it's an A film and tries to get in. The railway policeman comes up and says, "This chap is under 12, he can't go in unless accompanied by an adult." As I happen to live next door to George, I am the adult who accompanies him. He pays for my seat at the pictures every time. That is why I get treated to pictures. So, any of you who have a grudge against British Railways and you want to try this stunt, don't do it, because there is a snag. You do have to pay for somebody to take you into pictures afterwards. Or, as Shakespeare put it, half fares do make us treaters.
I think I must have travelled in the next compartment to George. I've always wondered why the ticket collector is so cross when he wakes me up. Well, that brings us to a final score, with Denis Norden winning with that story, in which Dilys Powell and Frank Muir nevertheless win by 1/2 mark. And that also brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC. The BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and those taking part are Anne Scott James, Dilys Powell, Denis Norden, and Frank Muir. And here's round one to test their vocabulary. For 2 marks, if they can give me the meaning of the following words approximately right. Beginning with Dilys Powell, the meaning of the word hypethral, Hypaethral, or you can leave out the first A, Hypethral. Hypethral.
It's under something.
Yes?
Ethereal. Under the sky.
Yes.
Under the sky.
Open to the sky, 2 marks. Denis Norden. What is a pawnee? P-A-W-N-E-E. A pawnee.
Or knee. I fell down on the ground and I hurt my... It's a
Something to do with a
pawnee.
pop shop, do you think?
Yes. Yes, carry on with that.
Well, it's either that which is pawned or he who pawns.
No, not he who pawns, but he who...
He who...
Is pawned.
He who is pawned.
Well, no.
He who receives into pawn.
That's it. A pawnee is the person with whom pawn is deposited. In other words, a pawnbroker. It was also a North American Indian tribe, I think, and it's also the Hindustani for water, or pani, and brandy pawnee was what you asked for if you didn't want to ask for a chota peg, which was brandy and water. 2 marks, I think, Dennis. That's all right. Anne Scott James, what is a cairngorm?
Oh, we've moved out of India now.
Definitely.
It's a kind of a semi-precious stone.
Mm-hmm.
And I presume it comes from the Cairngorms in Scotland.
Yes. Do you know what it looks like?
Well, it comes in, yes, I'm sure I know better than you do. It can come in several colours, Jack. You can't get away with just one, and it's a sort of rocky lump.
Yes. Would you like to hazard a guess about the colour?
Sort of brownie. Yes,
Yes, that's fair enough. Jolly good. Well done, Anne. It's a yellow or wine-coloured, semi-precious crystal stone found in the Grampians, particularly on Cairngorm itself. Well done. Used for brooches. Frank Muir, what is a durbar? D-U-R-B-A-R.
Durbar, there's one in Delhi, wasn't there?
Yes.
French for two. So
It won't help to this.
it's a bar that only sells doubles. No, they couldn't have been that because Queen Victoria went there, didn't she? It's a kind of Indian garden party, isn't it?
Yes, I think that'll do. It's the court of an Indian ruler or a public levee, or if you like it, garden party, given by an Indian prince, or when we were there, given by the viceroy. Well, before we start round two, I give each team a quotation for them to write down, and I want the 2 women members of the team to study their quotations, and at the end of the programme, I shall ask them what they come from, the source. So, Dilys Powell and Frank Muir, here's your quotation. To travel, hopefully, is a better thing than to arrive. And Anne Scott James and Denis Norden, your quotation is, a stitch in time saves 9. And then at the end of the programme, I shall ask Frank and Denis to give me their idea of how these words came to be said or written. And so to round 2. And this is a round of mums and dads in Shakespeare's plays. For 2 marks, I want to know who are the parents of the following very important characters. Beginning with Dilys Powell. Dilys, who was the father of Catherine or Katerina in The Taming of the Shrew?
Hell, his name.
I don't know.
He was a rich gentleman of Padua. I don't think that
Yes.
helps much.
We know all that. And he had another daughter called Bianca.
Quite right.
We can't think of his name. Can we? Or can we?
Casa. It's not Casa Bianca.
I'll give you a rather generous half mark for knowing that he had 2 daughters, one called Caterina and the other called Bianca. But he himself was called Baptista.
Oh, and I should never have known
News
that.
to me.
No, never have known that.
Now, Denis Norden. Denis, who was Romeo's mother?
Mrs. Mrs. Capulet.
No.
No, Mrs. Montague.
Yes.
Mrs. Montague.
Yes, not Mrs., but...
Not Miss.
Well, Well, I don't know. She'll always be Mrs. Montague to me. We may have been on more familiar terms. Well, so, Signora Montague. Montague's an unlikely type of Italian name, now I come to think of it.
I think that's good enough, too. She was Lady Montague, the wife of the House of Montague. Anne Scott James, the father of Desdemona in Othello.
Oh.
Brabante.
Brabantio, a senator of Venice. Well done. Frank Muir, who was Hamlet's mother?
Hamlet's mother? Oh, Queen Gert. Queen Gert.
Yes, absolutely right. Next round is origins and derivations. Maximum of 3 marks, which is it's a rather difficult round to mark, this one. Dilys Powell, beginning with you. What is a windfall and why?
A windfall is an unexpected bit of lolly.
Yes. Yes, it's good enough. And meaning from, how's it come to that meaning?
What I thought was an apple which fell off the tree.
And why is that?
It's picked up, and you don't have to pick it.
Yes, I see.
It's on the ground.
Falls at your feet.
Jolly lucky. It saves you the trouble of shinning up the tree with a ladder.
And who does the tree belong to?
Falling down. Oh, somebody else.
That's good enough. Windfall, unexpected piece of good fortune, unexpected legacy, for instance, falling into your lap without your having to work for it. Some people say that it comes from apples on other people's trees. You can pick them up. They are not allowed to climb up the tree and get them. But there is another derivation, and that is that noblemen with estates at one time were forbidden to cut their own timber because it had all been earmarked to build ships for the Royal Navy. And only if the wind happily blew a tree down could they use their own timber and wood in this way. That's the other explanation. Anyway, you get 3. Denis Norden, to have something up your sleeve.
Well, it means to have some kind of advantage hidden in reserve. Does it? Doesn't it?
Yes.
When they had those large sleeves, they used to wear those large sleeves, and they used to keep, you could carry a large brown loaf.
A peasant.
Piano, accordion. Complete change of clothing, actually. You carry in your sleeve.
Yes.
We just do a handkerchief now. Some people do.
Yes, that's a good deal of it, Dennis. But the thing that you sort of produced at the last minute...
Isn't it card sharping?
Yes, that's what I wanted.
What, to have an ace up one's?
Yes, that's fair enough. I think that's 3, all right. You've got something unexpected ready to bring out in an emergency, concealed but ready for use. And one derivation is that it was card sharpers who, as Dennis says, have an ace up their sleeve, or conjurers who have a rabbit. But as Dennis also said, there was a time in which you had extraordinarily capacious sleeves. You keep all sorts of things there, including notes and memoranda and things that help you, and bits of food and so on. And the nearest example of that nowadays, I think, is the university gown, in which impecunious undergraduates used to keep food that they'd begged.
And lady undergraduates.
Yes, and lady undergraduates. No, that's not allowed. Anne Scott James. The expression cross-grained.
Cross-grained. I should think it's from wood, isn't it?
Present meaning.
Present meaning first. I don't really know. I mean, it's sort of hybrid, doesn't it?
No, it
Cross-grained.
means just cross, doesn't it? It means sort of rather tetchy.
Irritable.
Yes,
Irritable.
that's good enough, yes.
And is it from the wood meeting the saw the wrong way? Is it from wood?
Yes. I think that's good enough.
Tetchy or irritable from the wood meeting the saw meeting the wood the wrong way.
That's it. You've got it right, Anne, that's all right. Means nowadays a cantankerous or intractable sort of person. Comes from carpentry. If you work with the grain, with the wood, it's very much more manageable. You work across the grain, particularly if there are 2 grains, a grain running across the regular grain, it's very much tougher, whether with saw or with any other kind of weapon. Frank Muir, the expression stuck up.
Well, it means having an exaggerated view of one's social importance.
Yes, that's exactly it. And what's it come from?
Well, when elegant people, for instance, in the Marie Antoinette era, piled their hair on top and lacquered it, and the hair was called stuck up. And they stuck things on their cheek. Or if they were ill, bulletins about their health were stuck up on the gates. How many more do you want?
All of which is quite true and entirely irrelevant. I don't think you're going to get this one.
Yeah.
I think we give you 1.5 marks. Someone who's conceited or full of his own self-importance and won't consort with other people whom he regards as lesser than he is, but it comes, quite obviously, from the peacock and the turkey cock, who stick up their tails and their feathers to make a great show and show their own importance, and to impress their company, particularly female company. The expression to cut someone means to refuse to recognize or to greet an acquaintance or a friend with the object of hurting or insulting them, or to express your displeasure. So for 2 marks, what are the following kinds of cut? Dilys Powell, the cut direct.
Cut direct?
Walk straight past
Yes.
them.
Just
Yes, walk straight past them and...
don't recognise them.
Yes, but who are you looking at?
I'm looking straight ahead. I'm not looking at them.
No, that's not the cut direct.
Isn't it?
You look at
Oh, look at them and don't know them.
and your eyes
Yes.
pass through them.
That's it.
Coldly
Yes.
and coolly.
Yes.
Yes, you're stuck up, in fact.
Yes, you are. Very much so. I think I'll allow you that one. 2 marks. You deliberately stare in the face of an acquaintance and don't recognize them at all. In old times, you often actually walked across the other side of the road to make it even more obvious and ostentatious, so as to avoid meeting them. That's the cut direct. And Denis Norden, the cut infernal.
Infernal, or you tell him to go to hell. I don't do this. Any of
No,
these
we
things,
don't
nor
move
do
in
I.
this kind of world.
You wouldn't be looking up.
Pardon?
You wouldn't be looking up.
I wouldn't be looking up. Oh, I see. You look down to Dante's Inferno. You walk past him looking down, trip over something.
That's it, Dennis. 1.5, I think. I helped you a bit there. You stoop down in a very ostentatious way and pick up a pebble or adjust your shoelaces, concentrating on this. And the wretched chap goes past and he's been cut on the way. Very sad.
Wonderful word. I live in Golders Green. You can't... You could never find a pebble to pick up.
Anne Scott James, this makes it easier, I'm afraid. The cut sublime.
Well, I suppose you just go in a stuck-up way with your head in the air, staring at the sky and walk past.
That's it. You stare at the clouds or a church spire or something, and again they feel terribly upset. 2 marks. And Frank Muir, the cut indirect.
The unkindest cut of all. The cut indirect, well, you nip into a sweet shop and avoid meeting them altogether.
Yes, I think that's good enough. 2 marks. You missed out one tiny ingredient, which is important. You look the other way and you pretend not to see an acquaintance who knows perfectly well that you already have seen him. Well, the next round is about nouns of assembly. You have, for instance, a brood of chickens, a flock of sheep, a pride of lions, and so on. For 2 marks, what creatures of the following nouns of assembly? Dilys Powell, a charm of...
Goldfinches.
Quite right. A charm of goldfinches. And the charm originally meant the song. They all sang prettily together. 2 marks.
Goldfishes.
Denis Norden, a skulk of...
A skulk of... A skulk of indirect cutters. don't know.
It's a skulk of foxes. No marks. Anne Scott James, a stud of...
Well, hussies, I should have thought. Well, we all know horses go to stud. Must
Yes,
be right.
yes, they are, but it's one particular sex of horse.
Stallions.
No.
Mares. Well, it's got to be...
1 out of 2, because the chances of getting that right were pretty...
mare.
It's a stud of mares, and it comes from a German word, which is much the same, studa, a mare. And Frank Muir, a leap of...
It's a wisp of snipe.
Yes.
But that counts as mouth. And what are you
I
trying?
was going to say hares also.
A leap of something that leaps.
No, you're not going to get it, I'm afraid. No. It's not all that easy, and I think it's a bit of sort of punning. It's a leap of leopards. No marks. Now we come to the last round and go back to those quotations I gave the two teams earlier on in the programme. So for 2 marks, Dilys Powell, can you give me the origin of your quotation? To travel, hopefully, is a better thing than to arrive.
Robert Louis Stevenson.
Yes, 2 marks. And now, Anne Scott James, the origin of yours, which was a stitch in time saves 9.
Well, this is a proverb or aphorism.
Yes?
Written by a writer of proverbs or aphorisms.
Yes?
Whose name has been lost, according to me, in the passage of time.
You're dead right. It's anon.
Anon.
Anon, or traditional.
My favourite author.
Yes. Sorry. Can't find it at all. 2. And now I shall ask Denis and Frank to give me their explanations of how the quotations came into being. And on this occasion, the marks will go to whichever unlikely explanation receives the longer amount of applause from the audience here in the theatre. So first of all, back to Frank Muir. To travel, hopefully, is a better thing than to arrive.
To travel, hopefully, is a better thing than to arrive. To truffle hopefully. To truffle hopefully is a better thing. To trifle hoopfully. To trifle hoopfully is a... Well, it all happened on a Thursday. It was on this Thursday, and we were in this caravan, you see, my wife and I, and we were we're on holiday. And this Thursday, we parked the caravan in a field because we'd run out of food, and my wife wanted to get an early night because she wanted me to drive in the morning to Reading, which is about 40 miles away, and get some butter for breakfast. So... travel, hopefully, is a butter thing than to travel. Well, anyway, I'm not very good at getting up in the mornings, even on Thursdays. And that night, that Thursday evening, I lay rather long in bed. I couldn't get to sleep because I was worried about my cold ears. I have very cold ears in the winter. And I was lying in bed the way one does in the narrow bunk, thinking. And I thought, if I had my ears pierced... and got 2 little wire baskets, and when winter came, put a live coal in each of the baskets. My ears would then be kept warm for an hour or 2, and I wouldn't go around looking like sort of twin rear-lighted motor car. And I was working this out in my mind. I didn't get sleep till about 3, and I slept in rather late in the morning. My wife had woken up about 9 o'clock, and I didn't know this till afterwards when she told me. She decided to get in the car, hitch the caravan on, and drive into Reading, you see. I didn't know that at the time. I was still asleep, and she also didn't know it's illegal to do this. But anyway, she hitched on the wagon and drove me, still asleep in the back, into Reading. Well, she stopped at the traffic lights with a little jerk. I awoke. And you know when you wake up in the morning, you suddenly want to, take a breath of fresh air. So in my pyjamas, I got out of the caravan, scratching my chest, eyes blurred with sleepy dust, and found my feet were rather cold. Instead of being on earth, they were on pavement. It was at that moment that the traffic lights changed from red to green. And I was left standing on the pavement in my pyjamas in Reading High Street about 9:15. Now, this was extremely trying situation to find myself in. I tried to knock up a pub. I thought, to travel hopfully is a bitter thing. I had no joy with the pub at all. So I searched around. There was a bit of luck. I found a supermarket, and I thought my wife would probably be buying butter there. And it was just at the end of Reading High Street, and there was a car park at the side. So I went round the side, and there was the caravan. So I crawled in, shut the door behind me, and climbed into bed. And that's the end of the story. Well, it's almost the end, actually. It wasn't the right caravan, but the lady was there, you know, and then her husband wanted explanations. But that is the end of the story. I'm sorry I couldn't bring in the line to travel hopefully is a better thing than to arrive. But, you know, occasionally one does get these sort of hopeless ones. And it's best to just drivel away. And there's always the hope that one could get to it. You probably wonder why I don't sort of do a big thing and rave at Jack to give me a new line. But we don't do it on this programme. We have one maxim. It's, even if the line looks impossible, to drivel hopefully is a better thing than do a rave.
Well, I'm still unknotting my mind about 3 rounds back, but I'll catch up in the end. And so we go on to Denis Norden, and if you remember, his quotation was, "A stitch in time saves 9."
I started my writing career as a kind of journalist for a periodical which a lot of you may know. It's called the Barbershop Quarterly. It's a trade journal. I was the society columnist. On it, I used to find out what was doing among some of the leading barbers in the trade. I think the man who caught my fancy most, the man I've always remembered, was a chap they used to call the Demon Barber of Camden Town. He had, his name was Dino Robato. He was an elderly chap, and he had this 2-chair lock-up shop, which he used to call the Short Sharp Shave Shop of Camden Town. But he called it that because actually that was his speciality, was shaving. He had 3 times won a competition which was sponsored by my periodical, and this particular time I'm telling you about, he'd received a challenge from a new man who'd opened a little bit further down the road from him, a chap called Charles Smallpiece, and he had offered Dino a challenge to what they call a shave-off. Over a given period of time, how many people can you shave? And he'd challenged Dino. Well, of course, Dino was cock-a-hoop, you know, he was top man. As I say, he'd won a gold 3 times in our own competition, so he was pretty confident, and he practiced all week on his assistant, a chap called Wannion McGinty. I remember him terribly well, actually. And he came to the day, and the chaps from my paper came along to act as judges. 10 minutes, that was the thing, you see, in 10 minutes. How many people could you shave in 10 minutes? Just as we were about to start the whistle for the go, suddenly Dino let out a howl. He said, "My brush, where's my brush? Who's taken my brush?" And we looked, and sure enough, his brush had gone. Now, to you laymen, you see, you think a razor is important for shaving. It isn't. It's the brush, that's the secret. Of course, Dino's brush, through years of use, was smooth and soft and pliant. It had gone. I knew where it had gone. I could see the look on this fellow Charles Smallpiece's face. I knew. So Charles Smallpiece just stepped forward sort of confidently and said, "Well, if he can't find his brush and he can't do it, I'll claim a walkover." Well, you know, it was a shame, really. And I said, "No, wait a minute. According to the rules, the BBC rule, that's the British Barbers Committee, who are convention that puts the rules for these things. If a competitor loses a piece of equipment, he is allowed a quarter of an hour with which to replace it." So Dino said, "No, I'm going to replace a brush, you know, quarter of an hour. How am I going to find a brush, quarter of an hour right here?" I said, "Listen, Camden Town, you must shave most of the keepers at the zoo. These are my best customers. I got them the best customers." I said, "Well, get on to the chap who's the head keeper at the large birdhouse." He said, "What, I want a head keeper?" I said, "Listen, the nearest thing to a soft, pliant shaving brush are the tail feathers of an ostrich. Ask him if..." He said, "He's not going to take all the feathers off an ostrich just because..." I said, "Don't ask him to take the feathers off. He can send the ostrich along." Well, you know, you'll have to explain. And it took a bit of expostulation, but 10 minutes' time, there was the ostrich. And I got a piece of twine, and I tied the tail feathers round so that they formed one small plume. And then just as our quarter of an hour grace was almost up, almost on the last second, we dipped this plume of the ostrich into the shaving mug and started it on the customer's face. Well, now, you won't believe this, but Dino broke the record that day. I mean, some of you may know the shave-off record up till that time, which was 6 customers in 10 minutes. He not only broke the record, he shattered it. And I think that was one of the happiest moments of my life when I was able to write the headline to that story for my paper. Ostrich and Twines shaves 9.
Well, you make it very difficult for me because the result of those 2 stories is an exact tie. So I award a mark equally to Frank Muir and to Denis Norden, and that brings us to a final score in which Anne Scott James and Denis Norden win by 5 marks from Dilys Powell and from Frank, and it also brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland. The program was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC.